Welcome, wanderers of history, to another quiet evening beneath the candlelight. You have found your way once again to this small corner of time where stories breathe, and the past is not a stranger, but an old friend with remarkable habits. Tonight we travel backward, not merely to watch kings and knights, but to understand the invisible codes that ruled their lives. The strange rules, the baffling customs, the odd, almost comical rituals that somehow made perfect sense in their world. Before we step through the gates of the Middle Ages, take a moment to settle yourself. Dim the lights. Let the sound of this story be the only thing moving through your room. And if you enjoy these slow journeys into forgotten centuries, take a second to follow the channel, only if it feels right to you. It helps this small community of night wanderers grow, and it lets me keep the candles burning a little longer. Now, close your eyes if you wish. Imagine the air growing cooler, the light shifting from LED blue to the flicker of a tallow candle, the scent of wood smoke, wool, and something faintly metallic, iron perhaps, or rain. The year is somewhere between 1200 and 1350, depending on whom you ask. The clocks have not yet been invented, and time is marked by bells, hunger, and fatigue. The medieval world was a place of rules. Rules for how to sleep, how to eat, how to walk, how to love, how to die. To modernize, many of these seem absurd. You could be fined for wearing the wrong color, cursed for washing on a holy day, or even condemned for using your left hand too confidently. Yet, behind every strange prohibition was a reason, a piece of logic that belonged to its own time, often rooted in survival. The people of the Middle Ages were not fools. They were navigating a dangerous, unpredictable world. Plagues, famines, fires, invasions, and a God who, they believed, watched every breath they took. In such a world, rules were not chains, they were scaffolding. Without them, everything could collapse. Our story begins in a small English village around the year 1320. The traveler, that is you, dear listener, arrives at dusk after days of riding through rain and mud. The road winds between hedges, past sheep pens and a mill that hums with the tired rhythm of human labor. Ahead stands the church spire, pointing like a silent warning into a gray sky. The smell of smoke and wet hay drifts from the cottages. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a bell rings the curfew, a hollow sound that means it is time for fires to be covered, candles to be snuffed, doors to be barred. No lights after the bell, a peasant mutters, tightening the latch. Fire takes faster than prayer. That is your first rule of the medieval world, the curfew. The word itself comes from couvre-feu, cover the fire. It was not a metaphor. People literally covered their hearths with iron lids or damp ashes at night. Why? Because houses were made of timber and thatch, and a single spark could turn an entire village into a pyre. The rule was not about obedience, it was about survival. In some towns, ringing the bell after sunset was mandatory by law. If you were found with a burning flame after the bell, you could be fined, or worse. In Paris, records show that even bakers were forced to bake during daylight hours to prevent nighttime fires. The logic was simple, the consequences terrifying. You move closer to the inn, where tired travelers are gathering before the door closes for the night. Inside, the smell of beer and unwashed wool is thick but comforting. The innkeeper gestures toward the common room. A bed, if you share it, he says. And you realize the second rule. In this world, privacy is not a right, it is a luxury. You share a bed with strangers because warmth is more valuable than pride. The bed is narrow, filled with straw that crunches when you move. Someone snores beside you. Another mutters a prayer in Latin. It feels odd, but in a world without central heating, this custom makes perfect sense. Sharing body heat meant survival through freezing nights. Even wealthier inns offered shared rooms, and travelers slept shoulder to shoulder, their purses tied to their belts to keep thieves at bay. In the corner, a woman wearing a long wool cap tends to a small candle stub. "Best put that out soon," the innkeeper warns. She nods. Her hat, the nightcap, is another curious relic of necessity. Medieval homes were cold. Stone walls sucked warmth from the air, and heat rose through the roof, leaving sleepers chilled. The nightcap was not a fashion statement, it was insulation. Without it, one could wake with a cold so severe it might be mistaken for divine punishment. When the bell of midnight rings from the church tower, something peculiar happens. People stir. Some sit up, stretch, and begin to move quietly. It is the watch, that strange middle-of-the-night interval between first sleep and second sleep. For an hour or two, the world half wakes. Some pray. Some check their livestock. Some whisper soft conversations in the dark. It is an accepted, even sacred time. No one calls it insomnia. They believe the mind, refreshed by rest, is closest to God in this hour. Historians today have found records, letters, sermons, even medical treatises, describing this two-phase sleep as entirely normal. Only when artificial light arrived centuries later did we forget the rhythm our bodies once knew. As the night deepens again and you lie among strangers, the sounds of snoring blend with the faint chant of monks from a distant monastery. They are performing Compline, the last prayer before silence. And you realize, in this world, even sleep is a moral act. You must end the day clean, in body and in soul. If you die in your sleep, your last words must have been to God. A chilling thought, perhaps, but for them, entirely practical. Death was not rare, it was routine. Saying a bedtime prayer was as vital as covering your fire or locking your door. These rules, cover the flame, share the bed, pray before sleep, form the skeleton of order. They are not superstition. They are the architecture of survival in a time when one mistake could mean the loss of everything. But as dawn breaks, the world's logic changes again. Morning brings new rules, rules of food, clothing, and behavior, each born from centuries of faith, fear, and famine. In this village, the rooster crows not because it chooses to, but because it must. The day itself is regulated by sound, by ritual, by obedience to patterns that few dare question. And as the light filters through the shutter cracks, your journey continues. The people rise, stretch, and greet another day, bound by their strange but sensible laws. They do not think of them as odd. They think of them as the way things have always been. The baker kneads dough without tasting it, for he has not yet said his morning prayer. The wife wraps her hair beneath a linen coif before stepping outside, for modesty is a rule as real as gravity. The shepherd counts his sheep aloud to ensure none have died overnight, whispering a charm as old as the hills. And somewhere in the churchyard, a priest prepares to bless the first meal of the day. Tomorrow we will sit at that table of wood, smoke, and superstition and explore how eating itself became an act of obedience. But for now, rest easy, traveler. The night's rules have been obeyed. The fires are safe. The prayers have been said. The Middle Ages, for all their strangeness, make a kind of sense after all. Morning comes not with sunlight, but with smoke. The village stirs under a pale, wintry dawn, the kind of light that belongs to mist more than to day. The air smells of damp straw, ashes, and humanity, the scent of lives lived close together. A rooster calls, half-heartedly, as though even it doubts the usefulness of waking. The inn's door creaks open, and you, the traveler, step into the chill. A thin fog curls around your boots. Somewhere, someone is already beating bread dough against a board, the sound echoing like muffled thunder. Breakfast in the Middle Ages is not a grand affair. It is survival, measured in mouthfuls. bread, ale, and occasionally a little cheese. But even in something as simple as eating, rules abound, rules that to a modern visitor seem both strange and strangely elegant. You follow the sound of voices to the edge of the square, where a baker and his wife are preparing loaves. She crosses herself before touching the dough, murmuring a short prayer. It is not superstition, it is obligation. Bread is not merely food, it is holy matter, a symbol of Christ's body. To knead it without reverence would be as blasphemous as laughing during Mass. For centuries, the Church taught that daily bread was sacred, and bakers could be fined or publicly shamed if their loaves were underweight, adulterated, or sold too dearly. Fairness in bread was fairness before God. The idea that you could weigh the soul of a man by the honesty of his bread was more than metaphor, it was law. You watch as a woman buys a small loaf and tucks it into her apron. No butter, no fruit, no sugar. Those belong to feast days. In medieval life, the calendar ruled the stomach. Days of fasting were more common than days of indulgence. Nearly a third of the year was dedicated to abstinence of one kind or another. Meat, eggs, dairy, these were forbidden on many days, especially Wednesdays, Fridays, and during Lent. The rule was not cruelty, it was rhythm. The Church believed the body must be disciplined to keep the soul alert. Yet beneath this divine logic was a practical layer. Fasting stretched scarce food supplies. In a society vulnerable to famine, piety doubled as population management. You find yourself at a communal table near the inn, where travelers and locals gather for the morning meal. There are no forks, only knives, spoons, and hands. The fork, though known in Byzantium since the 11th century, was viewed with suspicion in Western Europe for centuries afterward. Church leaders called it decadent, even sinful. God gave us fingers, one cleric wrote, and it is an insult to him to use artificial devices. Whether that truly reflected divine intention or merely conservatism is uncertain, but the message was clear. To live modestly meant to touch your food as God made you. The fork's rise to acceptance would take centuries, only becoming fashionable during the Renaissance among Italians and French courtiers who could afford to be elegant. In the 13th century, touching your food was not impolite, it was humble. The innkeeper sets down a jug of ale. It is warm, flat, and surprisingly mild. You hesitate, longing for water, but the man chuckles. "Water," he says, shaking his head. "You don't drink the river unless you wish to meet St. Peter early." And he is right. In most towns, the streams that supplied water also carried sewage. Wells were safer, but often reserved for the wealthy or for monasteries. The average villager drank weak beer or wine, brewed daily and safer than water due to its boiling process. Even children drank ale, though with little alcohol. It was hydration by fermentation. Historians call this small beer, a necessity disguised as habit. In truth, the entire culture of medieval drinking, the endless tankards, the morning drafts, the suspicious absence of clear water, grew from this single fact. Cleanliness could kill you if misunderstood. And misunderstanding cleanliness was easy. Take bathing, for instance. To modern minds, cleanliness is next to godliness. But in the Middle Ages, cleanliness was a theological riddle. Bathing was common enough in the early medieval period. Roman bathhouses lingered in cities, and monastic communities often maintained hot water facilities. But by the later centuries, opinion began to shift. Public bathhouses became associated with moral decay and disease. During outbreaks of plague, people believed that hot water opened the pores and made the body vulnerable to miasma, bad air that carried sickness. The logic was wrong by modern science, but reasonable by the medicine of its day. Physicians of the time followed Galenic theory. Balance of humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile was essential to health. A hot bath could upset that balance. So people turned instead to dry washing, rubbing with linen cloths, scented herbs, or vinegar. You didn't bathe to remove dirt, you bathed to realign your soul's fluids. Still, not everyone avoided water. Monks in particular were expected to wash regularly, before meals, before prayer, and on holy feast days. Cleanliness for them was spiritual discipline, not vanity. Monastic rules often specified how and when washing could occur. In the Rule of Saint Benedict, written centuries earlier but still followed, even bathing was moderated. Too much was indulgent, too little was sloth. Let the body be tended, it reads, lest the soul grow negligent. Peasants, however, lived by other standards. In the fields, dirt was not sin, it was evidence of labor. The poorest villagers may have washed their hands and faces daily, but full bathing was rare, reserved for special occasions like weddings or religious festivals. And yet, contrary to modern myth, medieval people did not all stink. They used herbs like lavender, rosemary, and sage to mask odors. They chewed fennel seeds or mint leaves for breath. Wealthier homes burned sweet wood or incense to perfume rooms. In France, a popular practice called strewing involved scattering aromatic herbs on the floor to release fragrance as people walked. The idea that the Middle Ages were a cesspool of filth comes largely from later centuries, when moralists wanted to contrast their own civilized age with the dark past. The truth, as usual, lies between extremes. People smelled of smoke, sweat, and work, but so did their saints. At the table, a young priest sits nearby, sipping his ale with delicate caution. You ask him, softly, why the church forbids meat so often. He smiles, patient with your ignorance. Meat is fire, he says. It stirs the blood, quickens the pulse. It is not for days of repentance. This idea, that certain foods inflamed the passions, was widely accepted. Meat was hot and moist in the Galenic sense, which meant it encouraged lust, anger, and pride. Fish, by contrast, was cold and moist, temperate, humble, suited for the faithful. So, on Fridays, the entire continent smelled of cod and herring. If you wanted to stay virtuous, you ate like a fish. Food itself carried moral weight. Gluttony was one of the 7 deadly sins, but starvation was not virtue either. The key was moderation, a balance between indulgence and deprivation. Even banquets followed strict etiquette to demonstrate moral order. Guests were seated by rank, dishes served in symbolic numbers, 3 for the Trinity, 7 for perfection, 12 for apostles. Every motion had meaning. To eat greedily was to reveal a disorderly soul. To eat gracefully, even with dirty hands, was to mirror divine harmony. You notice a man refusing a slice of onion offered by his companion. When asked why, he mutters that onions heat the blood and tempt the humors. Indeed, many vegetables, especially raw ones, were treated with suspicion. Physicians warned that uncooked greens were dangerous to the stomach and could cause melancholy. Part of this belief came from the ancient idea that decay began with moisture. Since vegetables grew in damp soil, they were thought to carry corruption. In truth, poor sanitation made this partially accurate. Unwashed produce could indeed spread illness. So they boiled everything into oblivion and called it prudence. As noon approaches, the village fills with the aroma of boiling pottage, a stew of grains, vegetables, and sometimes a bit of meat if fortune smiled. Every home has a pot hanging above the hearth, rarely emptied, continuously fed with scraps. It was the medieval slow cooker, a living meal that evolved daily. The rule here was simple: nothing wasted. In an economy of scarcity, thrift was virtue. Throwing away food was not only foolish but sinful, for it insulted those who had none. Parish records show that some towns fined bakers or butchers who discarded spoiled goods instead of giving them to the poor. To waste was to offend both God and community. In the afternoon, you wander toward the edge of the village, where a small bathhouse once stood. Now it is abandoned, its wooden sign faded by time. Once, these were places not only for washing, but for socializing.
Men and women often bathed together, a custom that scandalized later generations, but was, in its own time, less about lust and more about practicality. By the 15th century, though, this mingling had nearly vanished, stamped out by moral reformers and fear of contagion. Some historians argue that this decline in bathing contributed to the spread of later diseases. Others suggest that dry hygiene practices compensated. The evidence is unclear, but it shows one thing beyond doubt. Cleanliness, like faith, was a negotiation between safety and sin. As evening shadows lengthen, you return to the inn. A pot of stew simmers on the fire. A child hums a hymn while scraping a wooden bowl clean. The day's rhythm has unfolded without question. No one here asks why they do what they do. They follow the rules because life depends on them. Their world is not one of choice, but of continuity. When you think about it, every strange habit carries an echo of survival. The fork was prideful, so they used hands. Bathing was risky, so they rubbed with herbs. Meat was sinful, so they learned to love fish. And even though science has moved on, the logic remains oddly familiar. We too have our invisible rules: what to eat, when to sleep, what to fear. They are just packaged with better lighting and fewer saints. Night descends again. The bells ring the couvre-feu once more. People pull shutters closed, whispering brief prayers. The air fills with the smell of tallow candles, smoke, and wet wool. Somewhere, the priest walks past, murmuring a psalm. You watch him go, thinking of all the rules you have witnessed today. Rules that seem rigid, but are, in truth, acts of devotion to life itself. Perhaps that is the lesson of this century: to live in danger and yet find meaning in discipline. As the fire dims, the villagers retreat into their sleep, folding into the same rhythm as their ancestors. You too find your place among them, aware that every sip of ale, every whispered prayer, every superstition about onions and baths is part of a vast, unbroken logic. Tomorrow, the journey will continue, into color and fabric, where even the clothes you wear could betray your class or your sins. But for now, the night holds steady, and the rules of the body rest, briefly satisfied. The world, for all its strangeness, feels orderly once more. When dawn returns, the world greets you in color, or rather, the absence of it. The fog that had hidden the village now drifts away, revealing not a parade of reds and blues, but a wash of browns, grays, and earthy greens.
The Middle Ages, you realize, were painted in restraint. The peasants moving through the muddy lanes wear the shades of the land itself. Wool the color of sheep, linen faded by sun and smoke. There is beauty here, but it is quiet, subdued, almost apologetic. Yet this modesty is not accidental. It is the result of law. You walk past a weaver's cottage where strips of dyed fabric hang drying from a wooden beam. The woman inside stirs a vat of indigo with a wooden pole, her hands stained blue to the wrist. She nods politely but says nothing. Speech wastes breath that could be spent spinning. Her daughter folds lengths of cloth, muttering numbers under her breath. On the wall hangs a scrap of parchment with writing so faint it's nearly invisible. You ask about it, and she tells you, "It's the law. We must keep record of every yard dyed." Her voice carries no resentment, only resignation. The parchment is part of what historians now call sumptuary law, the great wardrobe rulebook of medieval Europe. It dictated what people could wear, in what colors, and of what material. To modern minds, this seems absurd. Why would a government care about your sleeves? But in the medieval world, clothing was not self-expression. It was social order made visible. Take England, for instance. The Statutes of Apparel, issued in 1363 under King Edward III, divided society by thread and pigment. The nobility could wear velvet, silk, and ermine fur. The gentry might enjoy satin or damask. Merchants were permitted fine wool, but nothing too bright or foreign.
The peasants, those who worked the land, were restricted to clothes of russet or blanket, meaning coarse fabrics dyed in simple, dull tones.
The reasoning was explicit. Each man and woman must dress according to their estate. To appear wealthier than you were was not ambition, it was deception. It threatened the divine hierarchy that everyone believed had been set by God Himself. A historian once called the Middle Ages a world where clothing was confession. What you wore revealed who you were, who you served, and where you belonged in the cosmic order. And in a time before photography, before paperwork, before ID cards, clothes were the ID. To wear silk without a title was like forging a royal seal. It blurred the lines of class, and blurred lines were dangerous. As you walk toward the town square, you notice a young man being confronted by a local official. His cloak, though patched, is dyed a deep crimson. The official frowns, asking how a miller's son could afford such a shade. Red was a color of wealth, for the dye came from the cochineal, or the more expensive kermes insect, imported at great cost from the Mediterranean. It took thousands of crushed beetles to make a single ounce of pigment. The young man stammers, claiming it was a gift from a cousin, but his voice trembles. The fine is small, 1 penny, but the humiliation is the real punishment. The message is clear: know your place, even in color. And yet, color had meanings beyond class. In medieval Europe, every shade carried moral weight. Blue symbolized purity and the Virgin Mary, which is why artists often painted her in ultramarine robes made from lapis lazuli, a pigment so rare it was worth more than gold. Red represented passion, both divine and dangerous, the color of martyrdom and lust in equal measure. Green was the hue of fertility and youth, but also of jealousy.
Black, today a color of sophistication, was once a sign of mourning and penitence, while white denoted chastity and spiritual cleanliness. You find yourself wondering, did people truly believe these associations, or did they simply follow the rules because they had to? The truth lies somewhere between devotion and fear. In a society where literacy was rare, color was language. Churches taught their congregations through stained glass, stories and light, and monarchs ruled through fabric. When a king rode into battle in scarlet or gold, it was not fashion, it was theology made visible, the ruler as God's chosen warrior. The peasants watching understood this without a single word. But not all rules were made by kings. Many were enforced by guilds, the powerful associations of craftsmen who guarded the secrets of their trades. If you were a tailor, dyer, or weaver, your entire life was governed by guild statutes. You could not sell cloth outside your city without permission. You could not undercut prices, change patterns, or even experiment with colors beyond your rank. Apprenticeship lasted years, sometimes decades, before one could become a master. The goal was not innovation, it was stability. In an age without machines, consistency was survival. And yet, human vanity finds cracks even in stone. People found ways to bend the rules. Peasants might dye their wool with onion skins or elderberries to create faint hues that mimicked richer tones. Wives of merchants wore slightly longer sleeves than allowed, tucking them up when the reeve passed by. The wealthy, of course, ignored the rules altogether. In France, Queen Isabeau was infamous for wearing gowns so wide they required attendants to carry the train. Moralists denounced her as a symbol of corruption. But for most people, a little color was a small rebellion against monotony. You stop by a market stall where ribbons are sold. The merchant, a clever woman with a missing tooth, smiles conspiratorially. "Don't worry," she says. "These ribbons fade fast. Wear them once and the color's gone by Sunday. The sheriff will never notice." She winks.
You buy one, a strip of faded blue linen, and tie it to your wrist. It feels like a harmless luxury, but the act carries centuries of defiance. In this world, even a ribbon is a quiet revolution. Inside the church, however, luxury takes on a different tone. As you step through the great wooden doors, your eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through stained glass. Here, colors explode. The Virgin's robe burns with celestial blue. The saints shimmer in green and gold. Christ's wounds blaze crimson. The poor outside live in shades of brown, yet their God wears the colors forbidden to them. And they accept this, not with envy, but with awe. The divine, after all, must look divine. To see heaven reflected in silk and pigment is to believe that such beauty exists somewhere beyond the mud. Still, not everyone was content with such hierarchy. In some towns, preachers rose up against vanity. The mendicant friars of the 13th century, such as the Franciscans, championed poverty as the truest faith. They wore plain brown habits and rope belts, owning nothing but sandals and prayer books. Their simplicity was both sermon and protest against the extravagance of nobles and bishops alike. Yet, paradoxically, their uniform became its own symbol of prestige. People touched the hems of their robes for blessings. The humblest fabric had become holy couture. A peculiar irony runs through all this. While peasants were forbidden to imitate the rich often imitated the holy.
Nobles commissioned clothing that mimicked the austerity of monastic garb, calling it pious fashion. They wore plain colors cut from the finest fabrics, humility woven in gold. It was, in its way, a form of moral theater. Everyone performed virtue, few could afford it. You pause by a tailor's workshop. The air smells of lanolin and dye. A young apprentice works the treadle, stitching fur trim onto a cloak. His master inspects the seam, nodding. "Good," he says. "Remember, a noble's sleeve should tell his story." He means it literally. Many garments were embroidered with heraldic symbols: lions, crosses, fleur-de-lis, or personal mottos in Latin. To wear a coat of arms was to announce your lineage. To invent one was a crime. In England, the College of Arms still preserves records of these symbols, some dating back to the 1400s. They were more than decoration. They were proof of blood, loyalty, and legitimacy. For women, clothing rules were even more intricate. Modesty was not merely a virtue, it was regulation. Married women covered their hair with veils or wimples, while unmarried girls could wear it loose, but only until marriageable age. In some regions, widows were required to dress in black for a year after their husband's death, under penalty of social disgrace. Bright colors on a widow were considered a public sin, as though joy itself required permission. There were even bylaws dictating sleeve length, neckline height, and the number of buttons allowed. The female body, wrapped and re-wrapped in obedience, became both symbol and battleground of morality. And yet, despite these restrictions, or perhaps because of them, fashion flourished. Tailors competed to invent subtler ways of showing status without breaking law. The wealthy used texture instead of color, layering fabrics to catch light. Jewels were hidden in hems, gold thread woven discreetly beneath outer garments. Even peasants found pride in craft: a well-made belt, a polished clasp, a neatly patched sleeve. Clothing was not about freedom, it was about communication. Every stitch spoke of someone's place in the world, someone's hope to rise a little higher, even if only by a thread. As the afternoon sun slants across the square, you notice how the light transforms everything. The drab browns turn warm, almost golden. A child's green tunic glows like spring moss. For a moment, the laws of color seem to dissolve, and beauty feels shared. But the moment passes quickly.
A group of soldiers marches through, their uniforms gleaming with heraldic red and silver. The townsfolk bow their heads. The hierarchy is restored. That night at the inn, you hang your borrowed ribbon by the bedside. Its blue has already faded to gray, as the merchant predicted. Yet somehow it feels meaningful, a reminder that even within strict order, people found ways to express longing, joy, rebellion. Perhaps that is what defines the medieval world, a dance between control and desire, between obedience and color. Every rule existed to maintain stability, but within those boundaries, life still shimmered. As the candle burns low, you think of all the hands that spun, dyed, and stitched through centuries of darkness. Each thread carries not only sweat and labor, but belief. The belief that appearance mattered because the world was always watching. In their eyes, clothes did not make the man, they revealed the soul. And though their laws may seem suffocating now, they built a kind of harmony, however fragile. The medieval world was a tapestry woven not only from wool and silk, but from conviction. Tomorrow, the traveler's path will lead beyond fabrics and colors, into the strange domain of love and marriage, a realm where rules multiplied like blessings, and where the heart itself was regulated by decree. But for now, the ribbon fades, the fire sighs, and sleep drapes over you like the simplest of cloaks. In this world, even dreams must follow their own quiet order. The morning is warm for once, and the road ahead smells faintly of blossoms and wood smoke. You've left behind the gray village of weavers and their muted colors. The fields stretch wider here, scattered with cottages and hedges in bloom. Somewhere, bells ring, not the harsh clang of curfew this time, but the clear, lilting chime of celebration. A wedding, perhaps. You follow the sound toward a small stone church nestled at the edge of a meadow. The entire village seems to have gathered. Women balancing garlands of flowers, children darting like sparrows, old men leaning on staffs. At the door, a priest adjusts his vestments, waiting. The bride and groom stand together, young, solemn, and strangely still. There are no rings of gold, no white gown, no music but birdsong. And yet, for them, this is the holiest moment of their lives. Marriage in the Middle Ages was not a matter of love, at least not as we understand it. It was a contract, spiritual, social, and often economic. The Church had claimed it as a sacrament by the 12th century, which meant it was not just a human agreement, but a divine covenant. To marry was to enter the architecture of God's plan. And like every sacred structure, it was surrounded by rules. The first rule, consent is sacred. This might surprise you. For all its rigid hierarchies, the medieval church insisted that a marriage could not exist without the free consent of both bride and groom. It was one of the earliest legal recognitions of personal choice in Western history. But in practice, that freedom was often swallowed by family pressure. A nod, a whispered "I will," even the exchange of tokens could bind two lives forever. There were cases, documented by canon lawyers, where a promise made in a field or at a market, overheard by witnesses, counted as marriage. No priest, no witnesses, no ceremony required. A simple declaration in the right words could seal your fate. The second rule, age is relative to duty. The Church set the minimum ages, 12 for girls, 14 for boys, reflecting the time when puberty marked readiness for adult roles. It shocks modern ears, and rightly so, but in their world of short lives and hard labor, childhood ended early. Many of these unions were betrothals rather than consummated marriages, arrangements meant to secure alliances or property. The truly shocking thing, perhaps, is not that people married young, but that so many did not choose at all. A chronicler from the 13th century wrote, "Love is the child of permission." By that, he meant that affection could grow only where rules allowed it.
Among peasants, marriage was practical. 2 strong backs to till a field, 2 mouths to share bread. Among nobles, it was political. A chess move sealed with parchment and seal. A daughter could be bartered like land. A son promised before his voice had even deepened. Yet within these boundaries, love still found ways to exist. Letters survive, awkward, tender, earnest, between husbands and wives separated by war or trade.
"I send you my heart," one merchant wrote to his wife in 1402, "which you keep better than I." It seems rules could not quite contain the human need for affection. At the wedding before you, the priest raises his hand for silence. He asks the couple if they come freely. They answer softly, barely audible above the wind. Then he blesses them, not at an altar but at the church door. This was tradition. Marriage was a social event, conducted in public view before entering the holy space. Only after the vows were spoken would the couple step inside for Mass. In some regions, the priest sprinkled holy water on their clasped hands, binding them in both sight and spirit. Inside the church, you notice a curious carving on the wall, 2 doves pecking at a single grain. Below it, an inscription reads, "What God has joined, let no man divide." This was not mere sentiment. Divorce, as we think of it, did not exist. Marriage was indissoluble except by death. Separation could occur, but remarriage was forbidden, unless one partner entered a monastery, a legal loophole used more often than you might think. Wealthy husbands occasionally encouraged their wives to take the veil, freeing themselves for new alliances. In less polite cases, they simply disappeared, leaving the church to sort out the paperwork of abandonment. Among common folk, the rules were looser, but the shame heavier. A broken marriage could taint an entire family's reputation. Church courts, yes, there were special ecclesiastical courts for such matters, handled disputes over dowries, fidelity, and legitimacy. Their records are a treasure trove of human messiness. Accusations of adultery, fights over goats and blankets, and endless debates about what counted as consent. One case from York in 1381 tells of a woman who claimed she was tricked into marriage by a man disguised as her fiancé's messenger. The court ruled against her, reasoning that her words of agreement were binding, even if misled. The law of vows cared little for feelings. Still, feelings had their own realm, the court of courtly love. This was the great paradox of the Middle Ages, a romantic ideal that existed entirely outside marriage. Born among the troubadours of southern France in the 12th century, it celebrated forbidden desire between noble ladies and knights. The love was usually adulterous, idealized, and deliberately unattainable. A lady inspired her knight to noble deeds by the power of longing alone. It was theater, philosophy, and sometimes a dangerous game. Kings and queens wrote about it, poets codified it, and the church condemned it as folly. Yet its language still shapes our modern idea of romance, the sighs, the pledges, the notion of love as ennobling suffering. You leave the wedding feast to wander through the village. The celebration has begun. Ale flows, bread is broken, laughter rolls like thunder. The bride's veil is pinned with rosemary, symbol of remembrance, while her belt is tied with knots meant to ensure fertility. The guests toss wheat instead of confetti, a charm for abundance. A fiddler plays a rough tune, and soon the newlyweds are lifted onto a bench, carried around the yard amid cheers. In another age, this might seem wild, but here it's joy wrapped in ritual. Later, you learn of the bedding ceremony, a custom that makes modern audiences blush. In many regions, the couple was escorted to their bed by witnesses to ensure the marriage was properly sealed. It was not as explicit as it sounds. Most witnesses left before privacy began, but their presence underscored the communal nature of marriage. It was not merely personal, it was an alliance witnessed and blessed by society. In this world, even intimacy was a public affair.
Yet love found its quiet spaces. Letters between monks and nuns show a tenderness that slipped past dogma. In the 12th century, the philosopher Peter Abelard and his student Heloise exchanged letters so passionate that the Church later censored them. They debated whether love could exist without sin, whether marriage sanctified desire or destroyed it. Abelard argued that their union was sacred because it was born of consent. Heloise replied that love, not law, was the true bond. Their tragedy, ending in separation and monastic vows, echoed through centuries as both caution and comfort. It proved that even under the heaviest rules, hearts could rebel. You spend the night in a different inn, smaller and poorer than the last. The host is a widow, her hair bound in black cloth. She tells you she has worn mourning for 3 years, though the law required only 1. I keep it, she says, because people look kinder when you are sad. There's wisdom in that, perhaps resignation too. In her world, grief is not just emotion, it's uniform. She can't own her husband's land, property passes to the eldest son, but she may keep his memory. In a way, the rule gives her power. It protects her from remarriage she doesn't want. A loophole of mourning. The next morning, you pass through a marketplace where a priest is scolding a young couple. They have been found living in sin, sharing a roof without marriage. Their punishment is public confession and a small fine.
The Church called such unions concubinage, though it was often tolerated quietly, especially among the poor who could not afford formal ceremonies. What mattered most to clerics was legitimacy, ensuring that children were born into recognized unions, that inheritances could be traced, that moral order remained visible. Behind the sermons, you sense the practical concern. Lineage, land, and labor had to stay predictable. Love without paperwork was chaos. And yet, despite all this control, marriage was not misery. In the rare letters and wills that survive, affection shines through. Husbands leaving small gifts for wives in testament, my best cloak, that she may not be cold. Wives instructing sons to honor your father, even as he vexed me. These small lines breathe humanity into the architecture of duty. They remind you that love, though shaped by law, still belonged to the living. Before you leave, you pass once more by the church where yesterday's wedding took place. The door stands open. The floor is strewn with petals. The couple's names are scratched into the wood of the pew, a small act of rebellion, carving permanence into a world where even vows could vanish into parchment dust. You smile, tracing the letters. It is an ordinary love, hemmed in by holy rules, but real all the same. And perhaps that is the truth of medieval love. It survived because of the rules, not despite them. In a time when death was near and futures uncertain, binding your life to another's under the gaze of eternity gave meaning. To break bread together, to share a name, to endure, it was all a kind of prayer. Their love was not freedom, it was structure. But within that structure, something profoundly human stirred, reaching out through the centuries to remind us that even under the weight of doctrine, hearts still beat the same rhythm. As twilight gathers over the fields, you watch smoke curl from cottage chimneys. Somewhere a couple whispers by candlelight, bound by vows and necessity. The night hums with quiet promises, some spoken, some broken, all sacred in their own way. Tomorrow the path will lead deeper into the shadows, where curfews and candles rule the night, and where even light itself obeys the law. The day dies slowly in the medieval world. There is no sudden switch, no flick of electricity to push back the dusk. Instead, the light fades like breath leaving a body. The fields grow silent, the air cools, and the sky deepens from gold to blue to black. And with that blackness comes the curfew bell, the same low iron voice that echoed through the night of your first arrival.
You are in another town now, larger than the last, surrounded by timber-framed houses and narrow streets. As the bell tolls, its sound rolls across the rooftops, swallowed by the mist that rises from the river. People move quickly, doors slam, shutters close, and the soft glow of candles vanishes behind wooden slats. The town seems to exhale. By law, no fire may burn openly after the bell. Every hearth must be covered, every lamp snuffed. It is not superstition, it is survival. Couvre-feu, the locals call it, the covering of the fire. The rule began in Norman England, but spread through much of Europe in various forms. In cities built of oak and straw, fire was the most feared enemy. One spark, carried by a gust of wind, could erase an entire street in minutes.
So the authorities decreed. At sunset, the bell will ring, and the day will end. Those who ignored it might face fines, imprisonment, or worse if flames spread. You can almost feel the tension in the air as the last lights die. The darkness is not empty, it is protective. A watchman passes, carrying a lantern encased in horn. Its glow is dull, yellow, and precious. "No wandering now," he mutters. "Only thieves and ghosts walk after the bell." He is not joking. In medieval towns, night belonged to the dangerous and the divine. The curfew divided respectable life from the unknown. Anyone caught outside risked suspicion, robbery, or accusation of witchcraft. Even the bravest souls locked their doors and trusted God to patrol the streets beyond. You follow the watchman to the town square. He pauses beside a wooden post, checks that the fire in the brazier has been smothered, and writes something in his ledger. A system of order, even in the dark. Medieval cities were noisy with rules. Fire was one, silence another. Bells marked not only time, but obedience. When the last tone faded, so did the right to move freely. Inside one house, you glimpse a family kneeling before the hearth, whispering their nightly prayers. The mother presses a lid of clay over the embers, sealing in warmth for morning. "God keep the flame," she murmurs. It is a small ritual, half prayer, half science. The covered coals will smolder safely through the night, ready to be rekindled at dawn. If the fire dies completely, relighting it is costly. Flint and tinder are luxuries. In some villages, people borrow fire from neighbors, carrying a glowing ember in a clay pot like a holy relic. Fire is both life and risk, sacred and forbidden. But what of light itself? Candles, torches, lamps, each comes with its own set of laws and dangers. A tallow candle burns greasy and uneven, sputtering soot onto ceilings. Beeswax, cleaner and brighter, is a privilege of the church and the wealthy. Monasteries glow with golden light during evening prayers, while peasants rely on the dim flame of a rushlight, a reed dipped in animal fat. It burns fast and smells foul, but it is enough to keep the dark at bay. The church watches over light like a guardian. Candle making is not just trade, it is theology. In cathedrals, every candle has meaning. The single flame on the altar represents Christ, the eternal light. Candles at funerals guide the dead. Candles at Mass illuminate truth. Candles at Easter symbolize resurrection. But outside the church, light carries suspicion. To burn a candle at the wrong time, in the wrong place, could be seen as witchcraft. People whispered that those who kept flames past curfew were inviting spirits or conducting charms. A lone candle in a window might mark a healer's house or a heretic's. As you wander the empty streets, you notice how absolute the darkness is. Without moon or torch, it's not merely dim, it's blind. The human eye was not made for such depth. Every sound grows louder. A dog barking far away, the creak of wood, the splash of water in a gutter. Fear is natural here. You understand now why people spoke of demons in the night.
not because they saw them, but because they couldn't see anything else. Near the town gate, a group of men gathers around a brazier, armed with staves. They are the Night Watch, sworn to keep peace until dawn. Their authority is old, almost sacred.
"We guard for God and for the king," one says, adjusting his cloak. They check for open fires, drunks, and strangers. Curfew violators can be detained until morning. The rule is not cruelty, it's containment. Cities are fragile ecosystems of wood, wool, and fear. One drunkard with a candle could destroy centuries. Yet, as strict as the rules seem, people learned to live within them. Lovers met secretly in church porches after curfew, whispering in the dark. Bakers rose before dawn, baking by the heat of banked embers, not open flame. Monks moved through cloisters by touch, memorizing the steps between chapel and dormitory. Life adapted. Darkness became a kind of rhythm, a pause between obligations. In the countryside, the night followed its own code. Farmers used the moon's phases as calendar and clock. Shepherds, awake to guard their flocks, carried torches made from resinous pine. Traveling at night was dangerous, yet sometimes necessary. Pilgrims walking toward shrines often began their journeys before sunrise, believing that early hours were blessed. To them, the dark was not evil, it was a test of faith. You stop at a tavern near the edge of town, its door barred but not locked. Inside, a few men sit in near darkness, their faces lit by a single candle stub. They speak in low tones about thieves and spirits, about how the night hides both sin and mercy. One tells of a legend, the Candle Warden, a spirit said to visit those who left their lights burning. If he found a candle unattended, he would snuff it with cold breath. "He saves us from fire," the man says solemnly, "but he takes a year from your life for every flame he spares." Whether myth or metaphor, it's a story that keeps people cautious. Rules and stories often serve the same purpose, to make fear manageable. Later, you step outside again. The streets are silent, the stars sharp as nails. From a nearby chapel, faint chanting drifts through the air, monks at matins, the midnight prayers. For them, the night is sacred time. While the world sleeps, they speak with God. The rhythm of bells divides their lives into ordered hours: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Each has its appointed moment, a way of sanctifying time itself. Even darkness follows the liturgy. You walk along the riverbank. The moon has risen, spilling pale light over the water. You can see the outlines of mills, bridges, the faint glint of wet stone. Somewhere, a fisherman checks his nets by feel, humming to ward off evil. The air smells of moss and damp wood. In this quiet, you begin to understand something profound. The medieval night was not just absence of light, it was another world, with its own laws, sounds, and citizens. There were practical benefits to curfew, too. Fewer lights meant less temptation for insects, fewer fires, less crime. And perhaps, on a deeper level, it taught people humility. The dark reminded them that they were small, that the world was vast and uncontrollable. Each morning was resurrection, each night a small rehearsal for death. To surrender to darkness willingly was an act of faith. As you return toward your lodgings, a sudden noise startles you. A crash, a shout. You freeze. Down the lane, a man runs with a bundle under his arm. Moments later, the night watch appears, torches flaring. "Thief!" they cry. The chase vanishes into shadow. You stand still, heart racing, aware of how thin the line is between safety and chaos. This is why the curfew exists, to mark the boundary between order and the wild. Without it, the night would consume everything. Back inside your chamber, the innkeeper hands you a candle enclosed in glass. "For travelers," she says kindly, "it won't spill flame." She watches as you light it, and the soft glow fills the room.
Mind you, when the bell rings again at dawn, snuff it first. The law still stands. You nod. She leaves. The room is small, the air thick with smoke, but the candlelight is comforting. You think of all the rules you've witnessed so far, how people covered their fires, prayed before bed, guarded their light like treasure. In our modern world, we chase brightness endlessly, as if darkness were failure. But to them, the night was balance. It was the world's way of exhaling, of resetting the rhythm of life. As the flame trembles, you feel a strange peace. The laws of the night, harsh as they seem, were born from wisdom, each one a safeguard against catastrophe. The curfew kept towns from burning. The candle laws preserved air and sanity. The watchman kept order where vision failed. Even the fear of spirits served a purpose. It made people careful. You snuff the candle, as they did centuries ago, with a small metal cap. Smoke rises like a ghost and vanishes. In the darkness that follows, your mind feels strangely clear. The night hums softly beyond the window, and somewhere in the distance, a bell begins to toll, the promise of another dawn. Tomorrow, you will travel beyond the walls, into the working world of guilds, merchants, and laborers, where new rules govern not the night, but the day itself, the laws of craft, trade, and moral conduct.
But for now, let the darkness hold you. The fire is covered, the door is barred, the world is asleep, and the law of night has been kept. Dawn rises over the town like a secret revealed slowly. The air smells of smoke, yeast, and iron. Bells ring again, not for curfew this time, but for labor. The streets, which only hours ago were locked in darkness, now pulse with sound. The creak of carts, the shouts of vendors, the rhythmic clang of hammers from the blacksmith's forge. You step into the narrow lanes where the heart of medieval life beats loudest. Not in the castle or the church, but in the workshops of men and women who built the world with their hands. Every trade here has its place, and every place its rule. A baker cannot sell before dawn. A weaver cannot dye on holy days. A butcher may only slaughter within certain hours. These are not suggestions. They are written laws, enforced by guilds and councils, sometimes more feared than kings. The guilds, those brotherhoods of craft, are the skeleton of the medieval economy. Without them, chaos would reign. With them, order sometimes smothers. You wander first to the forge. Inside, a blacksmith works bare-armed, muscles taut beneath soot. His hammer falls in steady rhythm, sparks scattering like stars. Above the door hangs a small iron cross, a reminder that even this fiery place is under divine watch. Every strike, the smith tells you, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow, is a prayer. A crooked nail offends both man and God. He's half joking, but not entirely. Before any craftsman could open a workshop, he had to swear an oath, to his guild, to his craft, and often before the altar. The blacksmith swore to work honestly, not to cheat on the weight of iron, not to charge unjustly, not to use false metal. The mason swore to carve true lines and never steal stone from the cathedral. The weaver promised not to mix inferior threads or shorten the yardstick. These oaths were not poetic, they were binding contracts of morality and survival. In a world without mass production or consumer law, trust was the currency of labor. The guild hall dominates the square, a timbered building crowned with carved angels and the symbols of every trade: hammer, spindle, scale, and saw. Inside, it smells of wax and ink. On the walls hang lists of names: masters, journeymen, apprentices, each ranked in careful hierarchy. The guild regulates everything: wages, prices, materials, even who may teach and who may learn. It decides who becomes a master and who remains a servant for life. Advancement requires not just skill, but time,
patience, and proof. An apprentice begins at 12 or 13, sometimes younger. He lives in the master's house, eats at his table, works long hours for little or no pay. His life is not his own, but in exchange he gains knowledge, shelter, and the chance, someday, to rise. After years of toil, he becomes a journeyman, traveling from town to town, seeking work and reputation. Only when he creates a masterpiece, a literal work of art that demonstrates his skill, can he apply to become a master himself. The guild judges the piece, often harshly. A single flaw can end a career. Yet, if approved, the craftsman earns freedom, the right to open his own shop, take apprentices, sign his name on his work. You pass a cooper's yard, where barrels stand like soldiers in formation. The cooper, a round man with a rounder laugh, greets you.
Every barrel that leaks, he says, costs not only wine, but honor. He shows you his guild mark, 2 rings and a stave, carved into the wood. Each trade had such marks, a kind of medieval brand to prove authenticity. If a barrel burst or a shoe split, the mark told the buyer whom to blame. Accountability was not optional, it was carved in oak and leather. The rhythm of the town fascinates you. It is both mechanical and human. Each craft begins its day at a different hour. The baker before dawn, the blacksmith by sunrise, the tailors after breakfast. Bells divide the day like punctuation. At noon, work stops for the Angelus, a brief prayer to the Virgin Mary. Hammers fall silent, looms rest, and for a few minutes the whole town breathes together. The sound of the bell rolling over rooftops is both command and comfort. Even work, it seems, must bow to the divine. At the edge of the marketplace, a small drama unfolds. A tanner is being fined for dumping waste into the stream. The stench of his trade clings to everything: hides, lime, and foul water. The river belongs to all, says the bailiff, reading from a parchment. The tanner mutters that he has no choice. The hides must soak. The bailiff does not care. Medieval towns were strict about pollution, not out of environmental awareness, but self-preservation. Filthy water meant disease. So even in the 13th century, towns imposed primitive sanitation laws. No offal in the street, no dung near the well, no slaughter within city walls. Rules carved from necessity, not virtue. Nearby, a group of tailors work by the window light, their needles glinting. They are forbidden to work after sunset, not because of laziness, but safety. Candles near cloth invite fire, and besides, the church insists that labor end with daylight. Work is holy, says one tailor, but greed is sin. The rule keeps exhaustion and envy at bay, though it also keeps poverty in place. The line between discipline and oppression is thin, and many walk it barefoot. You stop to watch a mason repair the wall of a church. His chisel moves with care, tapping gently at the stone as though listening to its reply. Masons, more than most, guarded their secrets. Their knowledge of geometry, balance, and design was almost mystical. In a time when few could write, they drew their plans with chalk and string, guided by symbols passed from master to apprentice. Some of these marks, triangles, circles, crossed lines, still adorn the stones of cathedrals across Europe. They are the silent signatures of forgotten men. Not all workers, however, enjoyed such dignity. Day laborers, who owned no tools or trade, lived on the edge of survival. They were hired by the hour, dismissed at will, and paid in coin or bread. For them, there were few rules beyond endurance. In times of plague or famine, they starved first. The guilds, though powerful, did little for the unskilled. Charity belonged to the church. justice to God. And yet, even among these poorest souls, pride endured. They called themselves the hands of the Lord, for without them no stone would stand, no grain would grind. As noon fades, you join a group of journeymen sharing a meal. They sit on the steps of the Guildhall, eating bread, cheese, and salted fish. Conversation turns to the statute of laborers, a law passed decades earlier after the Black Death. It had forbidden workers from demanding higher wages, even though half the population had died and labor was scarce. They said it was to stop greed, one man grumbles, but greed wears a crown. The others nod. The law was meant to freeze the old order in place, to keep peasants from rising through profit. It worked for a while, until rebellion cracked the kingdom like an egg. You sense a quiet anger still lingering in their words, the kind of anger that smolders for centuries. The guilds, for all their fairness, could also be jealous gatekeepers. They protected their members, but resisted innovation. A new technique, a foreign design, even a different dye could be banned as unholy or dishonest. Stability was sacred, change was sin. Yet it was this rigidity that would one day doom them, when the Renaissance and later the Industrial Age demanded flexibility. For now, though, the guilds rule unchallenged. You visit a candlemaker's shop, curious after last night's thoughts about fire. The air is thick with the smell of tallow. Dozens of candles hang from rods, cooling into pale ropes of wax. The candlemaker dips each wick carefully, counting aloud. 13 times for tallow, 9 for wax, he explains. Any more, and it drips too fast. His apron bears a red wax seal, the sign that he is licensed. Without it, his work could be confiscated. The guild inspects once a month, he says. If a candle burns unevenly, they fine you. He smiles wearily. Light is serious business. By late afternoon, the streets buzz with barter. Merchants haggle over spices, cobblers measure boots, fishmongers shout prices. Everything is transaction, but always within boundaries. Women may sell in markets, but only certain goods: bread, eggs, cloth, herbs. Men handle the heavier trades. The division is practical, yet shaped by deep-rooted beliefs about virtue and temptation. A woman selling knives, one preacher wrote, tempts the devil with sharp company. It is both amusing and tragic. In this world, gender is a rule book written in ink and enforced by sermon. As the sun lowers, the guild masters gather at the hall. You are permitted to watch, a rare privilege. The meeting begins with prayer. Then come the grievances: a blacksmith accused of overcharging, a baker who added too much sand to his flour, a common trick to stretch supply, an apprentice caught gambling. Each case is judged not just by law, but by morality. The guilty are fined or shamed publicly. The motto carved above the dais reads, "Work in truth or not at all." When the meeting ends, a scribe records everything in Latin, sealing the parchment with wax. These records, still preserved in archives today, offer one of history's clearest glimpses into everyday life. They show that the medieval world was not lawless or chaotic. It was meticulous, rule-bound, obsessed with fairness, even when fairness hurt. Every trade, every tool, every hour was part of a moral economy that equated good work with good faith. Night approaches again. The air cools. You linger by the forge one last time, watching the blacksmith bank his fire. He glances at you and smiles faintly. "The day is done," he says. "God counts every blow, and I have struck enough." He covers the embers with ash, echoing the ritual of the curfew you've now seen in every town. The rhythm never changes: labor, prayer, silence, sleep.
The rules that bind these people are the same that keep their world from collapsing. As you walk away, the bell rings once more, calling not for work, but for rest. The town exhales again. Tomorrow will bring new labor, new oaths, new worries. But tonight, the guild halls sleep under their painted beams, the apprentices dream of mastery, and the blacksmith's anvil cools like a heart that has earned its peace. And so you realize, in this age, work is not merely survival, it is salvation. The hammer is a hymn, the needle a prayer, the rulebook a scripture. They labor not only for bread, but for grace. Perhaps that is the strangest and most beautiful rule of all, that in a world of hardship, meaning was forged one strike at a time. The morning begins not with birdsong, but with bells. They toll from every direction, each one claiming the air like a voice of stone. You are no longer in the town of smiths and tailors, but in a place where the spirit, not the hammer, shapes the day, a monastery that clings to a green hillside above the valley. Below, fields ripple like cloth in the wind. Above, the gray towers pierce a low sky heavy with mist. The monastery gates stand open. A monk greets you, hood drawn, eyes calm as winter water. He says nothing, only gestures that you may enter. Inside, the air feels different, still, measured, almost fragile. Every step echoes. This is not a place for noise or laughter or hurry. It is a world ruled entirely by rhythm and obedience. "Welcome to the house of Saint Benedict," says the monk at last, his voice a whisper. "Here, every hour belongs to God." You soon learn that this is not poetry, but law.
The monks live by the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, yet still governing their lives 800 years later. It is a book of divine order, 73 chapters on how to eat, sleep, pray, speak, work, even how to breathe humility. Nothing escapes its reach. The bell divides their days into canonical hours: matins at midnight, lauds before dawn, prime at sunrise, and so on until compline before sleep. To live here is to surrender entirely to time as holy design. You are led to the refectory for the morning meal. It is silent. The only sound is the scrape of wooden spoons. A reader stands at a lectern, reciting from scripture as the monks eat their bread and pottage. No one looks up. Conversation is forbidden during meals. Words are reserved for prayer or necessity. To speak idly, even kindly, is to invite vanity. You chew quietly, realizing that silence itself is a kind of worship. After breakfast, the monk who guided you explains the rules with gentle pride. "We eat no meat," he says. "We drink wine only for health. We work with our hands, for labor keeps pride at bay. Pride, my son, is the oldest sin." He gestures toward the cloister garden, where others are tending herbs. Each plant has its virtue. Even the nettle, which stings, teaches patience. You smile, unsure whether he's joking. He isn't. In the monastery, sin is not an abstract concept, it is daily accounting. Every action has moral weight. There are sins of the flesh, sins of speech, sins of thought. A careless word can wound the soul as surely as a knife wounds the flesh. A gluttonous bite of bread is a rebellion against divine measure. Confession is both medicine and mirror. The monks confess weekly. The laity, at least yearly. The priest listens, absolves, assigns penance, a prayer, a fast, a pilgrimage. Sin is a debt, penance, its payment. The system is both spiritual and deeply practical. It keeps the conscience and the church running smoothly. Outside the monastery walls, the same rhythm governs ordinary lives, though in less perfect form. Every village has its priest, every week its mass, every year its feast days and fasts. The church calendar shapes time itself. There is Advent, then Lent, then Easter, then Pentecost.
There are saints' days, holy days, days of abstinence, and days of indulgence. The pattern is dizzying but deliberate. Life must always oscillate between denial and celebration, like breathing in and out. You travel down into the valley where peasants are gathering near the parish church. It is Sunday, and the air hums with anticipation. Bells ring again, smaller than those of the monastery, but no less commanding. The people cross themselves as they enter, removing hats, bowing heads. Inside, the air smells of incense and candle wax. A priest stands before the altar, his voice rising in Latin words few understand. The peasants listen not with intellect, but with awe. For them, Latin is not language, but music, a sound that bridges earth and heaven. You notice how the Mass is both beautiful and controlled. Every movement is prescribed. The gestures of the priest, the timing of the bell, the chant of the choir. Nothing spontaneous, nothing improvised. The faithful kneel, stand, kneel again. Ritual replaces reason. It is not meant to be understood. It is meant to be obeyed. After Mass, the priest addresses the villagers in their own tongue. His sermon is about sin, always sin. He warns against greed, lust, and gossip. He tells them the story of a man who refused to confess before death and was seen afterward wandering as a ghost. The people nod gravely. Fear is part of faith here. In an age of famine and plague, sin is not just a moral error, it is a danger to the body. God's anger, they believe, can manifest as sickness or storm. The Black Death, which swept through only decades ago, is still remembered as punishment for pride. You ask one old woman outside the church what she fears most. She answers simply, to die unshriven. To die without confession is to die dirty, unready for God's gaze. So people keep short accounts with heaven. They confess often, fast regularly, and obey the priest's smallest instruction. It is both comfort and control, faith and framework. As you walk through the village, you notice crosses carved into doorposts, charms hanging from rafters, little amulets of bone or wood tucked into clothing. These are not official church objects. They are remnants of older pagan habits, folk Christianity, the religion of everyday people. A charm against the evil eye, a prayer to Saint Apollonia for toothaches, Saint Blaise for throats, Saint Hubert for mad dogs. Each saint has a specialty, a small divine department in the bureaucracy of heaven. It's practical theology, rooted in fear and hope alike. The priest tolerates most of it. The church learned long ago that it is easier to baptize old customs than to erase them. So holy wells become saints' wells, ancient festivals become feast days, and midsummer bonfires are lit for St. John. Faith adapts, absorbing what it cannot kill. By evening, the village square fills again. The people gather for a morality play, a traveling performance sponsored by the church. Actors in simple robes represent virtues and vices, pride, envy, charity, faith. The devil appears, of course, horns and all, to tempt the soul. The children shriek, the adults laugh nervously, and the priest smiles thinly. It is theater with a purpose. The play ends, predictably, with repentance and redemption. The message is clear. Sin is a story you can rewrite, but only if you follow the script. Later that night, as you rest beneath a tree on the edge of town, you look up at the stars. Somewhere in those constellations, the medieval imagination saw order, not chaos. The heavens were God's calendar, His handwriting across the sky. To question that order was unthinkable. Astronomy, when it emerged, was born from astrology, a science of obedience. Even the planets were seen as servants of divine will. You remember hearing that in some towns, people were fined for skipping church, excommunicated for working on holy days, even executed for heresy. The Inquisition, that dark arm of authority, was meant not only to punish, but to purify. It hunted the disobedient souls who thought differently, Cathars, Waldensians, and others whose faith wandered outside official lines. Some were burned, some recanted, many simply vanished. Historians today debate the numbers, the motives, the horror. But the logic remains chillingly consistent. Better to destroy one soul than let error spread like plague. And yet, within the iron frame of religion, there is tenderness. You see it in how people pray for one another, how they light candles for the dead, how they kneel in mud during processions hoping for rain. Faith, for them, is not oppression, it is architecture. It gives meaning to suffering, structure to chaos. Even penance, harsh as it seems, offers relief. The reassurance that forgiveness is possible, that pain has purpose.
A monk once told you, "Obedience is the ladder to heaven." You didn't understand then, but perhaps you do now. In this age, obedience is not surrender, it's survival. To live outside the rules is to fall into darkness, both social and spiritual. The next morning, you wake to the sound of chant floating across the fields. The monks are singing lauds, the prayer of dawn. Their voices weave through mist and time, both mournful and serene. You realize that this sound has never ceased in 1,000 years. Somewhere, in some monastery, men still rise before sunrise to sing these same words. The rule endures because it offers something humans always crave: certainty. You walk back toward the monastery, passing peasants on their way to confession, merchants making the sign of the cross before travel, children practicing their prayers. It seems every movement is a ritual, every breath a small negotiation with heaven. The rules are endless, but so is the devotion behind them. As you enter the cloister once more, the monk who greeted you before appears. He smiles faintly. "You see now," he says, "why our rules are strict. Without them, we would forget who we are." He looks toward the horizon, where sunlight breaks over the hills. "Faith," he adds softly, "is not a cage. It is a compass." You watch as he joins the line of monks filing into the chapel, their robes swaying like shadows. The great wooden door closes, and the chant begins again, measured, ancient, unbroken. Perhaps that is the truest medieval miracle, that faith, with all its fear and formality, could still create something so beautiful. A world of obedience, yes, but also of music, meaning, and the quiet, enduring hope that order might just be divine. And as you turn to leave, the bell rings once more, echoing across stone and centuries. It is the sound of faith calling its children home, one rule at a time. The road grows quieter as you leave the valley of monasteries behind. The air, once filled with the scent of herbs and bread, carries something different now: smoke, ash, and the faint metallic tang of sickness. You are heading toward a city still haunted by memory. The people here speak of the great mortality as if it were a person who once lived among them, a cruel neighbor who had finally moved away but might return at any moment. As you approach the gates, you see the signs, literally. Wooden boards painted with crude red crosses hang from doors, some faded, some fresh. Beneath them, words scratched in Latin or vernacular: "Lord, have mercy." It is not decoration. These marks signal houses touched by plague, and though years have passed since the worst outbreak, fear remains a permanent resident. You enter cautiously. The streets are narrower than before, the buildings leaning inward as if conspiring against the light. A faint smell of vinegar and burning herbs hangs in the air. You soon learn why. In the years after the Black Death, cities across Europe adopted laws, some strange, some ingenious, to keep sickness at bay.
People did not yet know of germs or bacteria, but they understood contagion in their own way. They believed disease traveled through air, miasma, a poison born from rot and corruption. And so they fought air with air, perfume against pestilence. You watch as a city official walks the street carrying a smoking pan of juniper and rosemary. He swings it like a censer, wafting fragrant smoke into doorways. Behind him, a clerk records addresses.
This is the town's health patrol, enforcing one of the earliest public health regulations in Europe. The city statute declares that no filth may be dumped in the streets, that animals must be slaughtered outside the walls, and that every household must burn herbs during the summer months to purify the air. It's a strange kind of logic, but strangely effective. You pass a barber-surgeon's shop, a red and white pole spinning lazily in the breeze. Inside, the barber sharpens his knife while a boy cleans blood from the floorboards. On the wall hang bowls, saws, and leeches in glass jars. "We balance the humors," the barber explains proudly. "Too much blood, too much bile, too little air, all illness begins there." He gestures to a man seated in the chair, pale but calm. "We let a little blood today for fever. Tomorrow he will eat onion and vinegar to cool the humors." It sounds barbaric, yet you recall that their reasoning came from ancient medicine, the teachings of Galen and Hippocrates, filtered through centuries of commentary. The body was a universe of elements, hot, cold, wet, dry. Disease was imbalance, and the cure was harmony. The barber's blade, the apothecary's herbs, the priest's prayers, they were all parts of the same great puzzle: how to restore order to a world designed by God but ruled by decay. Outside, a bell rings, a single, solemn tone. People stop what they're doing and bow their heads. "The death bell," someone whispers, "another gone." The bell tolls daily here, a grim reminder that life and death are never far apart. Yet even in this city of ghosts, life goes on. Children chase dogs, merchants haggle, women hang laundry in the faint sun. The rules have made survival possible, if not easy.
You follow the scent of smoke to a square where men are building a pyre. Not for bodies this time, but for rubbish. Every week, the city decrees a bonfire of cleansing. Old clothes, spoiled food, straw from stables, all burned to drive away disease. It's both sanitation and ceremony, science and superstition entwined. People gather around, crossing themselves as the flames rise. A priest blesses the fire, reciting from the Psalms, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." Nearby, a group of physicians in long robes and beaked masks move through the crowd. Their appearance startles you, those hollow glass eyes, the long leather snouts stuffed with herbs. "Plague doctors," a bystander whispers. "They keep the sickness from their lungs." The sight is both eerie and fascinating. Each mask is filled with dried flowers, rose, lavender, clove, to filter the air. The doctors carry long sticks to examine patients without touch. Their methods seem theatrical, yet they are based on real attempts at prevention. In their own way, these doctors are pioneers, crafting the first form of protective gear centuries before anyone knew the word infection. You stop one of them, a tall man whose mask glints in the firelight. He tells you in muffled tones that the city has laws requiring quarantine. 40 days, he says, from the Italian 40 giorni. A ship from abroad must wait in harbor before its men may walk ashore. 40 days, long enough, we hope, for death to show itself if it must. You realize this simple measure, born from fear, will one day become one of medicine's greatest tools. As the doctor walks on, you look around and see how deeply these rules have changed the city. Windows are shuttered, not for privacy, but protection. Markets are spaced wider, with stalls separated by rope. The old custom of shaking hands has vanished. People now greet each other with nods or touches of the heart. Even funerals have laws. Bodies must be buried outside the walls, in fields consecrated but distant. Coffins are sealed, graves marked with lime to purify the soil. It all seems morbidly precise, but you understand the purpose. Order against oblivion. In the evening, you find lodging in a house near the river. The hostess, a widow, tells you stories while stirring a pot of thin soup. "We lost half our kin in the great pestilence," she says softly. "After that, the council forbade strangers from entering without the mayor's mark. They say it keeps the city safe." She sighs. "But sickness always finds a way." You ask if she believes the rules help. She nods slowly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they help us believe we have some power. That is something, too." The next day, you wander beyond the walls, where a small chapel stands among fields of rough grass. A wooden sign reads, "Lazaretto." It is a plague house, once a place of exile, now half empty. The air is heavy with silence. Inside, you find a monk tending to a single patient, a man wrapped in linen and feverish. The monk wears no mask, only a small cross around his neck. "Do you not fear infection?" you ask. He smiles faintly. "Of course, but mercy is also law." You stay a while, watching him wash the man's face with vinegar water. The act is tender, careful, and entirely human. It strikes you that in this world of fear and regulation, compassion is itself a form of rebellion. The monk explains that his order, followers of Saint Lazarus, has cared for the sick since the earliest days of leprosy. "We separate the ill not to reject them," he says, "but to save the rest. Isolation is love in disguise." Outside, the wind carries the faint scent of burning herbs. In the distance, you see figures walking along the road, pilgrims perhaps, or refugees from another outbreak. They keep their distance from each other, heads bowed, each carrying a staff and a pouch of garlic. The smell is pungent, almost unbearable, but to them it is armor. Garlic wards off plague, they believe. Vinegar purifies the breath. Bread soaked in wine strengthens the stomach. Every village has its recipes, half science, half prayer. You remember hearing of other remedies, crushed emeralds, powdered toad, drinks of mercury, or simply holding one's breath when passing a corpse. Some of these sound absurd, yet even the absurd has its reason. When knowledge is scarce, belief becomes medicine. And in a sense, belief heals, if not the body, then the mind that must endure. At sunset, you walk through the city once more. The air feels cleaner now, the fires reduced to embers. Children chase each other, laughing in ways that seem defiant, almost sacred. You realize that survival here is not just biological, it's spiritual. The laws of health are also the laws of hope. That night, as you rest by the riverbank, you think of the rules you've seen. Curfews for fire, guilds for labor, confessions for sin, and now quarantines for disease. Each one is born of fear, yet each transforms fear into order. Perhaps that is humanity's oldest instinct, not to eliminate danger, but to name it, contain it, ritualize it, to turn chaos into custom. Before sleep takes you, you watch the stars reflected in the black water. Somewhere, a bell tolls again, one long note for the sick, another for the dead, and then, unexpectedly, a third for the living. It is the smallest sound, but it feels like victory. When dawn comes, the city is already stirring. Merchants sweep the streets, women hang herbs in their windows, and the scent of rosemary rises with the morning sun. The rules have become routine now,
life itself shaped by caution and memory. But in that order, there is resilience. The people who lived through death learned to make law out of survival. You prepare to travel again, heading toward the hills beyond the river, where the castles and courts of nobles await. There you will see another kind of rule, one not about sickness or safety, but about honor and power. The laws of chivalry, of bloodlines, of battles fought not for survival, but for pride. But for now, as you walk away from the city of the sick, you realize something simple and profound. Fear may build prisons, but it can also build systems that save. The people of this age, bound by ignorance and courage alike, turned their terror into discipline. And through that discipline, they endured. Perhaps that, more than anything, is the secret logic of the Middle Ages. Every strange law, every ritual, every superstition, each is a fragment of the same unspoken prayer. Let us live through the night. The road from the city winds upward into the hills, where the air sharpens and the smell of herbs fades into the scent of wet stone. You follow a procession of riders, 2 guards in rough mail, a cart, and a handful of villagers trailing behind. Their faces are solemn, eyes lowered. At first, you think it might be a funeral, but as you draw closer, you see the figure in the cart, a man in chains. His tunic is torn, his head bowed. Ahead, on the ridge, the wooden outline of a gallows waits against the pale sky. This, then, is justice in the Middle Ages. You hesitate, wondering whether to continue, but curiosity wins. The guards do not stop you. People are allowed to witness punishment. In fact, they are expected to. Justice here is not private, it is performance. The cart creaks, the wheels sinking in mud. The condemned man looks neither left nor right. He has stolen bread, someone whispers, perhaps a sheep. A small crime, you think, but in a world where hunger stalks every home, theft is a kind of betrayal. It endangers the fragile trust that holds communities together. When the cart reaches the gallows, the crowd gathers in a ring. The priest steps forward, murmuring the final rites. The condemned man's lips move. Prayer or apology, you cannot tell. Then the rope is placed around his neck. There is no speech, no drama, only the snap of rope and the collective silence that follows. No one cheers, no one cries. Justice in this world is not spectacle for pleasure, it is instruction. You walk away, unsettled but fascinated. The harshness of it seems undeniable, yet you sense something deeper, a belief that fear itself keeps order. In a society without police, prisons, or formal bureaucracy, fear is the law's strongest ally. A punishment must not only correct the guilty, but remind the innocent of the price of sin. It is morality by memory. Later, in the next town, you find the market square bustling with life. But at its center stands another reminder of order, a wooden pillory, its iron hinges glinting in the sun. Children play near it without concern. It is part of the scenery, as ordinary as the well or the church. A man in the pillory is not a spectacle of cruelty, he is a moral lesson. He may have cheated at weights, lied in court, or broken the Sabbath. For a few hours he will stand exposed, mocked by passers-by, perhaps pelted with fruit or mud. When the punishment ends, he will go home, shamed but alive. A woman beside you shrugs when you ask if it's cruel. Better this than the rope, she says. And she's right. In many towns, the pillory was considered merciful. It spared the body, though not the pride. Public humiliation was the medieval equivalent of community service, swift, visible, unforgettable. As you wander further, you begin to see the full hierarchy of medieval punishment. For small crimes, fines, stocks, shaming, or banishment. For theft or blasphemy, mutilation, an ear cut,
a brand on the hand, a mark that warned others. For treason or murder, death, often public, sometimes ceremonial. Yet even these brutal methods carried structure. The law was not chaos. It was ritualized fear, choreographed and codified. You visit a courthouse, an open hall beneath the Lord's manor, where the bailiff sits behind a heavy table. The accused kneels before him, hat removed. There are no lawyers, no jury. The case is judged by oath, witness, or ordeal. In minor matters, the accused may swear innocence on the gospel, calling on God as witness. To lie is to risk one's soul. For greater crimes, the ordeal is literal. You have heard of these but never seen them. Trial by water, fire, or combat.
The clerk explains the theory. If God governs all, then he must reveal truth through signs. A woman accused of theft might carry hot iron in her hands. If her wounds heal cleanly, she is innocent. A man accused of false witness may be thrown into water. If he sinks, the water accepts him as pure. It sounds horrifying, yet to them it is divine justice. Better to be judged by God than by man. You recall a case recorded in a 13th century chronicle. A peasant accused of killing his neighbor was placed in the river with a rope tied to his waist. When he floated, the villagers gasped, "Guilty!" But the rope slipped and he sank before they could pull him out. The priest declared it God's swift confirmation. You wonder how many truths drowned that way. In time, these trials began to fade. The church itself grew uneasy, preferring confession and penance to ordeal. By the 14th century, many were replaced by written evidence and sworn testimony. But the logic remained the same. Justice must be visible, tangible, moral. To punish in private was meaningless. To punish in public was to teach. You pass a small chapel dedicated to Saint Michael, the archangel of judgment. Inside, carvings show souls weighed on scales, good deeds on one side, sins on the other. It strikes you that medieval justice mirrors divine justice almost perfectly. Balance, punishment, redemption. The soul and the citizen are judged by the same standard. In the evening, you share a meal with a local constable, a grizzled man with a weathered face. He speaks of the rules he enforces with weary pride. "We are few," he says, "but the fear of shame is many." He tells you that even gossip can act as law.
When word spreads that a man cheated his neighbor, he is punished without trial. No one trades with him, no one greets him. That is death enough. Social control, you realize, runs deeper than any rope or blade. The community itself is both jury and executioner, bound together by shared fear of disorder. Reputation is currency. To lose it is to starve. The constable recounts a story. A woman accused of witchcraft. Her crops failed, her neighbor's cow died, her herbs smelled strange. There was no proof, only fear. She was dragged before the Lord's court, asked to confess. When she denied it, they bound her and left her in the square for 3 days. No one spoke to her, not even her friends. On the 3rd day, she confessed, not to sorcery, but to loneliness. They released her, and she moved away. "We didn't burn her," the constable says softly. "We just made her disappear." You ask if he believes in witches. He shrugs. "Believe? I've seen too much fear to doubt anything." His words linger as the night deepens. Later, you walk to the edge of the town where an old gallows stands unused. The wood is cracked, the rope gone, but the post remains, a monument to the law's memory. A crow perches atop it, cawing once before taking flight. The silence it leaves behind feels heavier than any sermon. Justice, you think, was never meant to be kind. It was meant to remind. Every mark, every scar, every rumor carried forward the same lesson.
Disobedience has a price. And yet, within that fear, there was also a kind of fairness. A thief who confessed could seek mercy. A killer who repented before the priest might die clean. Even execution was not vengeance, but purification.
Death restored order where sin had broken it. The next morning, you visit a nearby castle where the Lord holds his court of law. Here, punishment wears silk. The accused kneels not in mud, but on carpet. The crimes are larger: treason, heresy, rebellion. The punishments are larger still: exile, confiscation, beheading. Yet even here, ceremony softens cruelty. The condemned are given confession, last words, sometimes wine. A noble's head must fall with dignity, his body buried intact. The lower classes are not afforded such grace. You stand in the hall as a herald reads aloud a sentence of banishment. The man kneeling before the Lord bows low, pressing his lips to the stone floor. May God judge between us, the Lord says, lifting his hand in benediction. And just like that, the man's life is erased, not by death, but by absence. Exile is a slow execution, cutting the soul from its roots. Afterward, you wander through the castle courtyard, where a small stone cage stands against the wall. It once held prisoners waiting judgment, but now it's empty. You run your fingers along the iron bars, still cold despite the sun. Inside, someone has scratched a prayer into the stone. Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. The handwriting is crude, but the words are precise. Even in chains, the writer believed that justice, true justice, lay elsewhere. As the day fades, you sit on a hill overlooking the town. Smoke rises from chimneys, bells toll for vespers, and the shadow of the gallows stretches long across the grass. The laws of fear have kept this world together, harsh but effective. They remind you that mercy and cruelty are not opposites here. They are neighbors. Both serve the same master, order. You think of your own time, where laws are written in books and enforced by unseen hands. Perhaps we have not changed so much. We too still need fear to behave, still hunger for spectacle when others fall. The Middle Ages only made that truth visible. Below, the last light glints off the pillory's iron hinges. Somewhere, a child laughs, chasing a dog through the square. Life goes on, even in the shadow of punishment. Maybe that is the truest justice of all, that despite the rules of fear, humanity refuses to be ruled entirely by fear. The night deepens, and the gallows fades into silhouette. Tomorrow, your journey will continue to the noble halls and training fields of knights, where law takes a new shape, not fear, but honor. Another set of rules, equally strange, equally human. But for now, the bells fall silent, and the town sleeps beneath the watchful eye of its own conscience. The morning sun flashes against steel. Somewhere in the valley below, you hear the clatter of hooves, the barked commands of a drill master, and the dull thud of wooden lances striking shields. The sound rolls across the hills like thunder. Disciplined, deliberate, the music of men who have turned violence into vocation. You have reached a knight's training ground, a place where boys are shaped into weapons and weapons are shaped into symbols. From a distance, it looks like chaos. Horses circling, squires running, banners fluttering. But as you draw closer, you see the pattern beneath the noise. Every gesture, every movement follows a rule. The sword, you realize, is not just a blade. It is law, embodied in iron. A knight in his 30s oversees the practice, his armor gleaming though scratched by use. His surcoat bears a faded crest, a silver cross on red. He notices you watching and approaches, lifting his visor. "You are a traveler?" he asks, his voice calm but alert. You nod. "Then watch," he says. "You will see how order is made from chaos." He gestures toward a young squire struggling to mount his horse. That one began at 7, he explains. He learned to serve before he learned to fight. He wakes his master, cleans his weapons, learns his prayers. Only when he proves discipline may he touch a sword. He smiles slightly. A knight's first battle is always against himself. That line stays with you. In this world, chivalry, the sacred code of knighthood, is as much about morality as combat. Its roots stretch deep, forged in the 11th and 12th centuries, when the Church sought to tame Europe's warrior class. Knights, once little more than armed thugs, became milites Christi, soldiers of Christ. The Church gave them rules, ceremonies, and a purpose higher than bloodshed. The sword, once a tool of greed, became a cross when held upright. Violence was sanctified, provided it served order, faith, or the weak. The knight leads you through the training yard. Boys strike at straw dummies, learning to aim for joints, not armor. Others practice courtesy, bowing, addressing their elders, reciting oaths. We teach them to fight, he says, but also when not to fight. That is the harder lesson. He hands you a parchment listing the vows of knighthood, copied from a ceremony centuries old. You read aloud, "To fear God and maintain his church, to serve the liege lord in valor and faith, to protect the weak and defenseless, to give succor to widows and orphans, to refrain from wanton giving of offense, to live by honor and for glory, to despise precarious reward."
The words sound lofty, almost impossible. The knight laughs softly. Few keep them all, he admits, but the trying is what makes us men, not beasts. Later, you attend a knighting ceremony in the castle chapel. The hall is lit by candles, the air thick with incense and silence. The young squire kneels before his lord, dressed in white to symbolize purity. A sword lies on the altar, its blade gleaming. The priest blesses it, murmuring Latin words. "Accipe gladium in nomine Dei." Take this sword in the name of God. The Lord touches the boy's shoulders with the flat of the blade. Once, twice, thrice. "Arise, Sir Thomas." The crowd murmurs approval. The new knight stands, trembling slightly. Around his neck, his lady ties a small token, a ribbon, a reminder of loyalty. It is a scene of beauty, but also of immense pressure. From this moment, his life belongs to two masters, his lord and his conscience. To fail either is to fall into disgrace, a fate worse than death. After the ceremony, you speak with an older knight whose beard is streaked with gray. He tells you that knighthood is not privilege, it is burden. "We eat last," he says. "We bleed first. That is the rule." He describes campaigns in France, in the Holy Land, in border wars against pagans. "You cannot imagine," he says quietly, "how many rules exist even in war." Indeed, the chivalric code extends even to the battlefield. Knights must give quarter to enemies who surrender, spare women and clergy, and never strike an unarmed man. Captured knights are ransomed, not executed, for to kill one of noble blood without cause is dishonor. Yet you sense how fragile these ideals are. For every tale of mercy, there are a dozen of massacre. The code was aspiration, not always reality. Still, the aspiration mattered. In an age of constant violence, it provided moral scaffolding. It transformed killing into ceremony, conquest into crusade, loyalty into virtue. To die honorably was to die cleansed. Even execution of a knight followed its own rules, by sword, not rope, so that dignity survived the flesh. You walk through the armory, where swords and shields line the walls like saints in a chapel. Each blade bears an inscription: Fides, Justitia, Fortitudo. Faith, justice, courage. The weapons gleam, but the room feels solemn, not proud. A young squire polishes a helmet and whispers a prayer before touching it. Why, you ask? He shrugs. A knight's armor is his conscience. It must not rust. Outside, the knights gather for a meal. The table is long, the etiquette precise. No one begins until the Lord gives blessing. Meat is carved by rank, wine poured by custom. They speak softly, never boasting. The rules of the feast mirror those of combat: discipline, humility, respect. Even laughter follows hierarchy. One knight spills his drink and immediately bows his head. "Forgive my clumsiness." The others nod gravely. In this world, honor is not pride. It is vigilance. After the meal, the conversation turns to stories of old. The tales of King Arthur, Roland, and the Paladins. The knights recite these like scripture, not fiction. The legends are moral compasses, examples of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice. "We live in their shadow," says one. "They remind us what men can be." You realize that mythology serves here as law, shaping behavior through dreams of perfection. As the day fades, the knights ride out to patrol the surrounding lands.
You follow them to a hill overlooking the fields. The leader raises his sword, and the setting sun glints along its edge. "We keep peace," he says. "That is our task. But peace is not the absence of war. It is the restraint within war." His words hang in the cool air. You think of how the same code that commands mercy also demands obedience. How a knight's vow to serve can justify endless battles. The contradictions of chivalry are as sharp as its blades. Yet without them, the age would have drowned entirely in blood. That night, you are invited to sleep in the barracks. The room smells of oil and leather. Around you, young squires murmur prayers before bed, reciting lines from the Psalm of Warriors. "Blessed be the Lord my strength, who teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight." You sense no malice in them, only earnestness. They believe that to fight well is to serve rightly. Before sleep, one squire whispers a question. "Do you think God truly cares which side wins?" His master, already half asleep, answers without opening his eyes. "He cares only how you fight." The simplicity of that answer feels ancient, terrifying, and true. At dawn, you wake to horns and hooves. The knights are departing for a tournament, a blend of sport, training, and spectacle. You join the procession, traveling to a nearby field already crowded with tents and banners. Vendors shout, minstrels play, and peasants gather in throngs. The tournament is both festival and theater. The knights tilt at one another with lances, striking shields, breaking spears, but rarely drawing blood. It is violence domesticated, a safe rehearsal for war. When one knight unhorses another, the crowd cheers. The fallen man rises, removes his helmet, and bows to his victor. There is no hatred, only form. Honor is measured not by victory, but by grace. Even the losers earn applause if they fall with dignity. You realize the tournament is not just sport, it is propaganda. It shows the people that their protectors are disciplined, noble, controlled. The laws of the sword reassure them that violence belongs to someone else, somewhere else. As the sun sets over the field, the lord of the tournament awards prizes: a golden clasp for valor, a ribbon for courtesy. The winner bows deeply, then presents the ribbon to a lady watching from the stands. It is ceremony, almost liturgy. Every gesture reinforces the same ideal: that strength must kneel before virtue, that power without restraint is sin. You walk away from the cheering crowd, feeling the rhythm of hooves fade behind you.
The knights remain silhouettes against the burning horizon, symbols of an age that believed discipline could sanctify danger. You wonder how long such faith can survive in a world that grows hungrier, crueler, more chaotic. The next morning, the training ground is empty. The swords hang quiet, the banners droop in the mist. Only the echo of hooves remains, a heartbeat in the distance. You realize that for all their rules, their glory, their prayers, the knights are mortal men, fragile, fearful, seeking purpose through order. Their laws are not divine decrees, but human inventions, born from the same longing that shapes every rule you have seen on this journey, the longing to make sense of chaos. Perhaps that is why their code endures in memory, even when their castles crumble.
The world no longer believes in chivalry, yet we still crave what it promised: honor without pride, courage without cruelty, strength bound to compassion. As you turn your gaze westward, the landscape softens. Ahead lie the abbeys, where monks rewrite the words of saints, and the convents, where nuns live by silence and faith. The next chapter of your journey waits there, in a world ruled not by swords, but by prayers. But before you go, you glance once more at the abandoned field, its trampled grass glowing faintly in the dawn. Somewhere in that silence, a knight's voice seems to whisper, "Live with honor, die with peace." And perhaps that, above all, was the truest law of the sword. The world outside the monastery wall hums with life: markets, horses, laughter, the clang of distant bells. But the moment you cross the gate, all of that fades. It's as though you've stepped into another dimension of time. Here, the air feels slower, heavier, deliberate. The grass itself seems to grow in rhythm with the chanting that drifts faintly from within. You have arrived at a Benedictine abbey, one of countless monasteries scattered across medieval Europe. Its stone walls are cool and damp. Its corridors smell of beeswax and ink. A young monk in a rough brown habit greets you with a silent nod. He presses a finger to his lips, not a warning, but an invitation. Silence here is not absence, it is presence. He leads you through the cloister, a square courtyard surrounded by arched walkways. The stone columns are carved with leaves and faces, each one unique. The monk gestures toward them. "Every carving," he whispers, "is a prayer turned to stone." Then he says no more. In this place, words are rationed like bread. You learn that the abbey follows the rule of Saint Benedict, written over 6 centuries ago and followed with near mathematical precision. It dictates when to pray, when to eat, when to sleep, and when to speak. Life is divided into hours, not measured by the sun, but sanctified by ritual. Matins in the deep night, lauds at dawn, prime at sunrise, terce mid-morning, sext at noon, none mid-afternoon, vespers at dusk, and compline before bed. The bell rings for each, and the monks move as one body, flowing through the cloisters like tides obeying the moon. Your guide brings you to the scriptorium, where a handful of monks work in perfect stillness. The only sound is the soft scratching of quills. They are copying manuscripts, scripture, commentaries, even bits of classical philosophy. You watch as one monk leans close to his parchment, tongue pressed to his lip, his fingers stained with ink. The letters he writes are not mere words, they are acts of devotion. To write beautifully is to pray beautifully. A single page can take weeks. Errors are scraped away with pumice, corrected with red ink, illuminated with gold leaf. These books, you realize, will outlive their makers. You speak quietly to the chief scribe, an old man with trembling hands. He tells you that each book must begin with a prayer for humility. "I begin this work for the glory of God and the instruction of man." Then, almost wistfully, he adds, No one remembers our names, only the words. In the refectory, meals are eaten in silence. A monk reads aloud from scripture as others chew their bread and beans. The voice echoes softly under the vaulted ceiling. No one looks up. No one interrupts. Conversation is forbidden, except in the parlor, a small room where monks may speak briefly on appointed days. The idea is simple. Words are weighty things, not to be spent lightly. Later, you visit the garden, half herbery, half sanctuary. Rows of lavender, sage, and mint shimmer in the afternoon sun. A monk kneels, trimming leaves with a small knife. He explains that each herb has its purpose: mint for digestion, sage for wounds, lavender for rest. The monastery is not only a place of prayer, but of medicine. Its gardens serve both body and soul. You recall that during the Black Death, it was monks like these who risked their lives to tend the sick. The rule demanded care for the ill, for in serving them, one served Christ himself. At dusk, the bells toll for vespers. The sound rolls across the fields, deep and solemn. You join the monks in the chapel, a cool, dim space lit by candlelight. The chant begins, voices rising and falling in perfect unity, like breath made music. You feel the sound in your bones more than your ears. The words are ancient, the meaning timeless. Praise, lament, surrender. The chant is not performance, it is pulse. It keeps the monastery alive. When the service ends, the monks file out wordlessly. You remain seated, still caught in the echo. It occurs to you that in this place, time has no sharp edges. It does not pass, it circles. Every day repeats itself, yet each repetition deepens. The outside world chases novelty. The cloister chases perfection through constancy. Later that evening, you speak with the abbot, a calm man whose face is lined but peaceful. His cell is bare, just a wooden table, a crucifix, and a single candle. You ask him why men choose such isolation. He smiles faintly. "We are not escaping the world," he says. "We are holding it still so it does not fall apart." He explains that monasteries exist not to flee chaos, but to anchor it. Their prayers, he believes, keep balance in creation, like unseen threads holding the heavens steady. You mention that the world outside seems ruled by war, plague, and fear. He nods. "And that is why we must obey our small rules. They are our way of refusing despair." His eyes gleam softly in the candlelight. Order is a form of hope. You stay the night in a guest cell, a small room with a straw mattress and a single window facing the moonlit courtyard. In the stillness, you hear the faint chant of the midnight prayers. It is steady, patient, eternal. You fall asleep to it, dreaming of monks writing letters of gold beneath endless bells. At dawn, you wake to the sound of footsteps in the hall. The monks are already at prime. You join them again, feeling oddly peaceful. The rhythm of their day has seeped into you, its discipline, its serenity. You begin to understand why so many chose this life. In a world of uncertainty, obedience brings freedom. After the service, you wander to a small adjoining convent on the hill. The nuns there follow similar rules, but with a gentler rhythm. Their habits are gray, their speech soft, their work quiet but vital. You meet Sister Agnes, who tends the infirmary. She shows you her ledger, written in careful Latin, recording births, deaths, and cures. "Every soul," she says, "is a page in God's book. We only copy what He writes." She leads you through the cloister, past laundry lines and beehives. "We make honey," she says proudly, "and salves for wounds, and sometimes we make peace." You ask how. She smiles. "By listening. People come from the villages with their worries. We cannot fight wars,
but we can untie knots. Her phrase stays with you. Untie knots. It feels like the perfect description of their role. As you leave the convent, you notice how quiet the world feels beyond its walls. The distant noise of carts and dogs seems almost profane. You realize that monasteries and convents are not escapes from reality, they are lungs for it. They breathe order into a chaotic world, inhaling pain and exhaling calm. Before you go, you visit the library, one of the abbey's greatest treasures. The shelves hold not only holy texts, but histories, poems, even fragments of lost science. A young monk hands you a volume of Aristotle, copied lovingly centuries after the philosopher's death. Without the monks, he says quietly, the world would have forgotten how to think. He's right. During centuries when war burned cities and kings changed crowns like seasons, these silent scribes preserved civilization one page at a time. As you step outside, the sun has risen fully. The abbey bell tolls again, calling the monks to work in the fields. Their habits move like brown ripples among the green. You pause at the gate and look back. The buildings seem timeless, neither ancient nor new. You realize that this is how eternity feels when lived daily, not as endless time, but as perfect repetition. You think of all the rules you have seen so far, the curfews that guarded fire, the guild oaths that preserved honesty, the health laws that tamed disease, the codes of chivalry that tried to civilize war.
And now, these, the rules of silence, patience, humility that civilize the soul. Every layer of medieval life, it seems, was bound by its own kind of discipline. But among them all, the rules of the cloister feel different. They are not meant to control others, only oneself. The abbot's words return to you. Order is a form of hope. You understand now that this hope is contagious. It seeps beyond the monastery walls, shaping the world it prays for. As you leave, the bell tolls once more, sext, the noon prayer. The sound follows you down the hill like a heartbeat. You glance back and see the monks bent over their tasks, their brown robes glowing faintly in the sun. The chant begins again, a hum rising from stone and faith alike. And you think, if all the rules of the Middle Ages could be reduced to one essence, perhaps it is this: to bring order to fear and peace to noise. The monks simply practiced it longer and better than anyone else. The world beyond will pull you back soon, to kings and merchants, to hunger and ambition. But for now, you walk slowly, letting the silence of the cloister linger like incense in your mind. The road from the monastery winds downward, curling through meadows that shimmer in the afternoon sun. For the first time in days, you hear laughter, not the measured, prayerful kind, but loud, unguarded human laughter. It comes from a village ahead, where smoke rises from chimneys and a dog barks at nothing in particular. After the silence of the cloister, the noise feels alive, almost chaotic. You pass under a wooden arch marked with a painted symbol, a simple cross intertwined with a sprig of rosemary. The villagers call it a blessing mark, meant to keep evil from crossing their threshold. You've seen such symbols before, carved into door frames, drawn in chalk on walls, stitched into baby clothes. Every village has its own variation, but all serve the same purpose: to tame the unseen. The people of this world live surrounded by mystery. Disease, weather, childbirth, famine, forces they cannot control, but must somehow explain. The Church offers divine logic, sin, and salvation. But faith alone does not always quiet fear. And so, between heaven and earth, there grows a web of smaller beliefs, superstitions, charms, rituals, half sacred, half secret. They form another kind of law, the rules of belief. In the village square, you see a woman selling bundles of herbs. She is old, her face like parchment, her hands stained green.
Wormwood for courage, she says, sage for sorrow, lavender for sleep. A mother buys a bundle and slips a coin into the woman's hand. No one calls her a witch, not today. In peaceful times, she is a healer, a wise woman. Only when fear spreads, when crops fail or fever strikes, does her skill become suspicion. You ask her about her remedies. She smiles faintly. They are not spells, she says, only memory. My mother taught me, and hers before her. Then she glances around and lowers her voice. But sometimes, when the herbs alone will not help, we whisper the old words too. She leans closer. It comforts the sick. You understand. The words themselves hold no power, only the faith behind them. Still, you feel a chill when she presses a small pouch into your hand. For protection, she says. Inside, you find salt, a sprig of thyme, and a piece of red thread.
Salt keeps the devil out. Red keeps the blood in. She grins, toothless but kind. The rules of the body are the same as the rules of the soul. That evening, you stay at the village inn. Before serving supper, the innkeeper's wife sprinkles a few drops of wine on the floor. For the house spirits, she explains. If we forget them, they make the pots crack. She laughs, but her eyes are serious. You realize that these small gestures, pouring wine, touching wood, hanging charms, are not superstition to her. They are etiquette, manners for the invisible world. Later, as you sit by the fire, a man tells a story about a ghost that guards the nearby mill. He walks at midnight, the man says, but only if the door is left unlocked, so we always bolt it tight. You smile. And has anyone seen him? The man shrugs. No, because we lock the door. The logic is perfect, circular, comforting. The ghost remains proof of the rule's necessity. As night deepens, the conversation turns to darker tales. Witches who fly with the storm, wolves that speak, lights that dance in graveyards. Some stories you know are exaggerations, others metaphors. But in this world, every tale carries moral weight. Witches, for example, represent more than evil. They embody the fear of chaos, of a woman's knowledge untethered by law. The line between magic and sin is thin. The Church condemns sorcery, but condones miracles, forbids divination, but practices exorcism. A priest may sprinkle holy water to banish demons, while a peasant does the same to bless her garden. Both believe in unseen power. The difference lies only in who controls it. The next morning, you visit the church at the edge of the village. Its walls are decorated with faded paintings, angels, demons, saints. But in the corners, beneath the paint, you notice something else. Symbols scratched into the plaster, crude circles, spirals, letters. The priest sees your gaze and smiles wearily. The people carve them when they are afraid, he says. They think it keeps the devil away. You ask if he objects. Better they carve than curse, he replies. He leads you to the churchyard where an old yew tree stands among the graves. The tree was here before the church, he says. We built around it. You realize the pattern. The church did not erase the old beliefs, it absorbed them. Pagan trees became holy trees. Springs once sacred to goddesses became wells of saints. The transformation was gentle, practical, almost diplomatic. Faith, like water, takes the shape of its vessel. As you walk through the graveyard, you see offerings at some stones, coins, bread, bits of cloth. We pray for the dead, the priest says, but the people feed them. He sighs. It comforts the living more than the dead, I think. That evening, you join a family for supper. Before eating, the father tosses a crumb of bread into the fire. For the lost, he mutters, so they do not wander hungry. You notice that every gesture, every ritual, has the same rhythm of fear and love, an attempt to weave meaning into the unknown. Later, the wind rises, thunder rumbles over the hills.
The villagers hurry to close shutters and gather near the hearth. Storms, they say, are the devil's breath. Lightning strikes are not chance but judgment. To ward it off, they ring the church bell, a custom so widespread that, across Europe, bell towers bear scorch marks from centuries of defiance. The belief is simple. The sound of holy metal drives away evil. You listen as the bell tolls through the rain, its voice trembling but steady. Whether divine or not, it works. The people are calmer already. The next morning, the sky is washed clean. You follow the stream toward the forest, where a hermit is said to live. The villagers call him the Wise One, though the priest calls him the Lost One. His hut stands half-hidden beneath an oak. He greets you with a nod, eyes bright, beard tangled with leaves. You come seeking answers, he says, as though he's been expecting you. He speaks of the old laws, the ones that ruled before kings and cathedrals. The land remembers, he says. Every river has its rule, every tree its truth. Break them, and the world breaks you. You ask if he means magic. He shakes his head. I mean balance. He shows you a small wooden carving of a serpent eating its tail. The world feeds on itself. Our prayers, our rules, they keep the circle unbroken. You realize his words echo those of the abbot, the knight, even the blacksmith. Different languages, same desire, order. Whether through oaths, laws, or charms, the medieval mind sought to hold chaos at bay. The hermit simply gives that chaos a face. Before you leave, he offers you a cup of water from a spring behind his hut. Drink, he says. It is blessed by the earth. The water tastes of stone and time. When you return to the village, you find people already whispering about you, the stranger who visited the hermit. Be careful, a woman warns. Those who speak with him sometimes lose their way. But her tone is not cruel. It is fearful, protective. The boundary between faith and suspicion is thin as a spider's thread. That night, you lie awake in the inn, listening to the creak of the roof and the soft breath of rain. You think about all the rules you've seen, those written in books, enforced by lords, blessed by priests, and these, the unwritten ones, whispered from mother to child. The latter seem humbler, but perhaps more enduring. Laws may change, but superstition persists. It adapts, disguises itself, and survives. At dawn, you see villagers heading toward the fields. A woman hangs a cross of woven straw above her door to protect against bad harvest. A child carries a small stone with a hole in it, the hag stone, said to reveal fairies if you look through it. None of this feels foolish anymore. You understand now that superstition is not ignorance. It is imagination structured by fear. It is how people build sense from mystery. Before you leave, the old herb woman finds you again. She presses a new charm into your hand, a piece of wax marked with the shape of a star. Keep it, she says, not because it works, but because you believe it might. You walk away smiling, the charm warm in your palm. Around you, the world hums with invisible laws, bells that banish storms, herbs that calm the dying, crosses that guard the door. The line between faith and superstition blurs until it disappears. Both, you realize, are languages for the same longing, to feel less alone in a vast, unpredictable universe. As the village fades behind you, the path climbs again toward open hills. The air is clean, the sky endless. You look at the charm one last time and tuck it into your coat. Maybe it is nonsense. Or maybe, like every rule you've seen on this journey, it carries a hidden wisdom, that belief itself is a kind of protection. You breathe in the scent of damp earth and rosemary and whisper, almost without thinking, the words the herb woman taught you. Salt keeps the devil out, red keeps the blood in. For a moment,
the world feels utterly still, balanced, safe. And perhaps that is the truest rule of all. When reason fails, belief must take its place, if only to keep the heart alive. The first thing you notice is the noise. Not the chant of monks or the hammering of forges, but a new kind of sound. Restless, uneven, alive. Carts rumbling over cobblestones, merchants shouting prices, hammers clanging on ships' hulls by the river. It is the sound of a world waking up. You've reached a port city, its name unimportant, for it could be any of a dozen in Europe at the dawn of the 15th century. Everywhere you look, things are moving. Silk from the east, wool from the north, coins changing hands like water. The air smells of salt, ink, and ambition. Here, the old rhythms of bell and prayer still echo, but they no longer rule. The clock tower in the square chimes the hour with mechanical precision, not sacred rhythm. It is not calling for worship, it is counting profit. You watch a merchant bargaining with a sailor over a shipment of spices. Their gestures are quick, their words sharp. Behind them stands a notary with ink-stained fingers, recording every transaction. God willing, the merchant says as he signs the paper. But you can tell it's habit, not faith. His real trust lies in numbers, not miracles. The world is changing. You walk through the market where books are being sold, not handwritten by monks, but printed. The smell of ink fills the air. A printer proudly shows his wares, slim volumes of Latin texts bound in cheap leather. From mines, he says, thumping one. The new press makes 100 copies a week. You open one and feel the rough texture of the page. It's imperfect, smudged, but alive. Knowledge is no longer a treasure locked in monasteries. It's a river flooding the streets. A scholar nearby preaches to a small crowd, waving a pamphlet in his hand. "No more superstition," he cries. "The world is ruled by laws, not omens." Some nod, others mutter prayers. You realize this is what revolution looks like, not swords, but ideas. You recall the rules you've witnessed across your journey, the curfews that tamed fire, the guilds that governed labor, the codes that shaped love and war. They all shared one goal, to make life predictable. But now, predictability itself is breaking. The merchant's profit, the scholar's logic, the sailor's compass, all point toward a new kind of faith, faith in human power. In the harbor, ships are being built larger, stronger, designed to sail farther than ever before. You meet a navigator tracing lines on a parchment map. "The world is not as small as we thought," he says, grinning. "There are lands beyond the horizon." You ask if the church approves. He laughs. The church blesses what it cannot stop. At night, you dine with a group of scholars in a tavern lit by smoky lamps. Their conversation dances between Latin and the vernacular. One speaks of the stars, another of anatomy, another of ancient texts rediscovered in dusty monasteries. "We read Aristotle," says one proudly, "and correct him." The others laugh. Once that would have been heresy, now it's sport. Yet the old world does not vanish quietly. Outside the tavern, a friar stands in the street shouting warnings about pride. "Knowledge without humility is sin," he cries. The scholars mock him gently, tossing coins into his bowl. "We pay for our absolution in advance," one jokes. But you see the unease behind their laughter. They know the friar speaks truth, even if they no longer live by it. You wander through the city as dawn rises. In one alley, an artist paints a wall with a fresco of saints and angels, but their faces look strangely human. You watch as he adds a faint smile to a figure of the Virgin. "She was a mother," he says, "not a statue." He's part of a new generation, the Renaissance men, who dare to find holiness in humanity. The same transformation happens everywhere. In music, harmony replaces plain chant.
In art, perspective replaces symbolism. In science, observation replaces revelation. The rules of heaven are giving way to the rules of nature. But the transition is not smooth. The church watches warily, sometimes embracing, sometimes condemning. A council decrees that astrology is heresy. Another quietly consults astrologers. A bishop blesses a printing press, then bans its books. The age is torn between fear and wonder. You meet a young physician dissecting a corpse, a forbidden act not long ago. He works by candlelight, eyes bright with curiosity. The body is not sinful, he insists. It is the map of God's design. He points to the muscles, the veins, the heart. See how perfect the mechanism is. Every rule we find here comes from him. You realize that even as faith shifts, reverence remains. It has simply changed direction.
Farther inland, you visit a university newly founded by royal charter. The students argue in courtyards, their robes fluttering like crow's wings. Philosophy, medicine, astronomy, all being rewritten. A lecturer compares the human mind to a mirror reflecting divine order. The more we understand, he says, the more we honor creation. It sounds noble, yet beneath it hums a quiet defiance. We can honor creation without permission. You begin to see the old world's rules cracking, but not collapsing. They bend, reshape, adapt. The guilds transform into merchant associations, governed now by contracts instead of oaths. The monasteries open their doors to scholars seeking ancient texts. Even the knights, once bound to war, now serve as courtiers, patrons of art rather than soldiers of faith. The same disciplines that once preserved survival now nurture innovation. Still, not everyone welcomes the change. In a small village, you see peasants kneeling before a relic, a bone said to belong to a saint. They pray for rain, for harvest, for health. The world is changing, a traveler tells them. No relic can bring rain. They ignore him. For them, faith is not an argument, it is necessity. The new age of reason shines bright in the cities, but its light fades quickly in the countryside. You realize that the medieval spirit, the need for rules, for structure, for meaning, has not died. It has only moved. Where once it served the church, it now serves trade, art, and science. Every new freedom invents its own discipline. The merchants have ledgers, the scholars have methods, the artists have proportion. The human mind cannot bear chaos for long. It always builds a new order from the ruins of the old. One afternoon, you stand on a hill overlooking the harbor. Below, a ship is preparing to sail west toward unknown waters. The crew loads barrels of water, sacks of grain, chests of tools. A priest blesses them, sprinkling holy water on the deck. "May God guide you," he says. The captain bows but smiles privately. "And may the wind do the same," he mutters. Faith and pragmatism sharing the same deck, two captains steering the same ship. You watch as the sails unfurl and catch the wind. The ship glides forward, creaking, straining, daring. You think of all the rules that brought humanity to this moment. The codes of the knights, the prayers of the monks, the chants of the priests, the fears of the peasants. Each one, in its way, was a stepping stone toward this act of courage, the willingness to go beyond the map. The sun sinks low, and the sea glitters like molten gold. You realize you are standing at the hinge of history, where one age exhales and another begins to breathe. The medieval world is not ending in destruction, but in transformation. Its rules are not broken, they are evolving, becoming invisible frameworks for the modern mind. You turn away from the sea and walk back through the city. The bells ring again, not for curfew, not for prayer, but for the end of the working day. Still, their sound feels familiar. Beneath all the change, the old rhythm endures.
Order, discipline, ritual, the heart of the medieval world still beats, just in a different body. As night falls, you stop by a tavern window and see a group of sailors raising their mugs in a toast. You can't hear their words, but you know their meaning. Luck, wind, faith, and fear, all the same old companions, dressed in new names.
You smile, realizing that the story of the Middle Ages was never about ignorance or darkness. It was about the endless human effort to impose sense on mystery, to turn fear into faith, chaos into rule, night into day. And even as this world shifts into the next, that effort continues. Somewhere behind you, the ship disappears over the horizon. You imagine what lies ahead for it. Storms, stars, silence, discovery, new lands, new rules, new reasons. And as you watch the last sliver of sail vanish into the dusk, you whisper to yourself, "Every rule once was a prayer." The morning feels different. The air itself seems lighter, as if centuries of breath held in terror have finally been released. You are standing in a city where everything feels new, its streets, its faces, even its thoughts. The buildings rise taller now, crowned not with crosses, but with domes and arches that seem to imitate the curve of heaven itself. Their builders no longer hide behind anonymity. They sign their names in stone. You are in Florence, though it could be anywhere in this awakening world. Venice, Antwerp, Paris, London, each one alive with a fever that has nothing to do with plague. It is the fever of curiosity. Painters, scholars, printers, explorers, all seem possessed by the same restless spirit. In the workshops, apprentices grind pigments not just for saints, but for merchants, philosophers, and even kings. In the studios, artists dissect bodies to learn how the muscles twist beneath the skin. In the libraries, men argue whether the earth moves around the sun or the sun around the earth. Once, such questions would have meant chains. Now, they mean fame, or at least the hope of it. You walk along the Arno River as the light reflects off its surface, rippling like molten gold. A young man sketches the reflections in his notebook, muttering about geometry and vision. His name, someone tells you, is Leonardo. You watch him draw not what he sees, but what he understands. It strikes you that this, more than any invention, is the birth of modernity, the decision to trust one's own eyes. Everywhere you turn, reason is replacing fear, but not destroying it. The old world's demons still linger, only now they wear new masks. The astrologer becomes an astronomer. The alchemist becomes a chemist. The miracle becomes experiment. Humanity has not stopped believing in magic. It has simply decided to measure it. You find yourself in a small cafe near the university, surrounded by men debating the works of a Polish cleric named Copernicus. "He says the earth moves," one cries. "Blasphemy," shouts another. Yet a third smiles and says, "And yet, it moves." You realize that reason itself has become a kind of faith, believed in with the same fervor that once filled cathedrals. Still, the transition is uneasy. For every philosopher daring to look upward, there is a preacher reminding people to look down. Too much knowledge, he warns, and man will forget his maker, his voice echoes through the square. But fewer heads bow than before. The people are learning that questioning is not rebellion, but reverence of another kind. You walk through a printing house where presses thunder like mechanical heartbeats. Pages fly, pamphlets, treatises, Bibles translated into languages common people can read. The smell of ink is thick, intoxicating. You pick up a printed page. Sapere aude, it reads. Dare to know. The words feel like fire. The master printer notices your fascination. Knowledge, he says, wiping ink from his hands, is the only thing that multiplies when divided. You smile, realizing how different this sounds from the monks who once guarded knowledge as sacred and scarce. Now, the book has become the new relic, mass-produced, yet miraculous in its own way. In the evening, you attend a public lecture at a hall lit by oil lamps. A man stands before the crowd, demonstrating how air has weight. He lowers a candle into a glass bell and watches the flame die. Not by magic, he says, but by nature. The audience gasps, not because it is mystical, but because it is not. They are witnessing the world made comprehensible. You think of the people you've met on your journey, the monk who believed order was prayer, the knight who swore his life to honor, the peasant who warded off evil with salt and red thread. All were seeking the same thing, security in the face of chaos. But now, a new kind of security is emerging, the certainty of understanding. Still, not everyone finds comfort in this new light. In a small chapel outside the city, you meet an old priest who watches these changes with quiet sorrow. "They no longer fear hell," he says softly. "They fear nothing." You ask if that is not progress. He sighs. "Perhaps, but fear kept us humble." His words linger, gentle but haunting. For all its cruelty, the medieval world taught reverence, the sense that existence itself was sacred. Without it, reason risks becoming arrogance. As you travel north, the landscape changes. Universities sprout like cathedrals once did, each with its own rituals, disputations, degrees, oaths of honesty. The scholars wear black robes instead of armor, quills instead of swords. Yet their duels are no less fierce. Ideas clash as steel once did. In a dim tavern in Wittenberg, you hear whispers of a monk named Martin who has nailed a challenge to a church door. His protest, they say, is shaking Christendom itself. Faith, too, is being redefined, less ritual, more conscience. You realize that even rebellion follows rules. Every revolution carries within it the ghost of the order it defies. The printing press spreads his words like wildfire. Across Europe, people argue, churches split, empires tremble. But beneath the noise, a quiet truth endures. The age of obedience has ended, but not the age of belief. The human soul still seeks its compass. It has simply learned to draw its own maps. You reach the Netherlands, where merchants and painters thrive together. Here, the sacred has become ordinary, and the ordinary sacred. A woman pours milk by a window. The sunlight on her hands is holiness enough. A boy flies a kite against a storm-gray sky, and for a moment, the heavens seem less threatening, more familiar. You realize that art has taken over where religion once ruled. It teaches awe without punishment, beauty without terror. One afternoon, you find yourself in a university courtyard where a philosopher demonstrates a telescope to a crowd. Through it, he says, one can see the moons of Jupiter. Proof, he declares, that the heavens are not perfect. The students murmur in shock. You take your turn to look. The moons are tiny, shimmering, impossibly real. For the first time, the universe feels vast and yet reachable. But not all are pleased. The philosopher is soon summoned before inquisitors. His discoveries, they say, challenge divine order. You attend the trial. He stands calmly before them and says, "I do not deny God. I only deny ignorance." It is the purest form of courage you have ever seen. Reason clothed in humility. As you leave the courtroom, you realize how fragile this new world still is. The old fear has not vanished. It merely changes form. The fire that once burned heretics now burns in the hearts of those who seek to question. Every age, it seems, must invent new heresies to test its faith.
In the countryside, farmers plow their fields under skies mapped by astronomers, but they still bless their tools with holy water. In cities, merchants calculate profits by numbers, yet pray before sailing. The dance between belief and reason continues, more intricate than ever. One evening, standing on a bridge as the sun sets behind the domes of Florence, you watch the colors shift from gold to violet. The city glows like a living manuscript, illuminated by light instead of gold leaf. You realize that the age of reason has not killed faith, it has refined it. Humanity no longer worships mystery out of fear, but studies it out of wonder. The two are not enemies, they are partners in a cosmic dialogue. You think of the first laws, the curfews, the guild rules, the vows of monks, and how they all began as responses to fear. They were humanity's first attempts to impose order on the unknown. But now, with reason as its new compass, mankind no longer hides from the dark, it steps into it with open eyes. Still, deep down, you know something else. Reason alone cannot fill the silence of the soul. The human heart still needs mystery, still craves meaning beyond measure. The medieval world may be fading, but its pulse lives on, in our rituals, our dreams, our longing for purpose. As night falls, you hear the city bells again. They no longer call for vespers. They mark the hour. Yet the sound carries the same ancient comfort. Order, rhythm, continuity. The world has changed its language, but not its music. You walk along the quiet streets, past candlelit windows where men and women write, read, think. Somewhere, a student copies the words of a new philosopher who dares to claim that the universe obeys mathematical laws. Somewhere else, a mother teaches her child to cross herself before bed. Both, in their own ways, are keeping the same flame alive. You look up at the sky, where the stars burn with indifferent beauty. For the first time, you see them not as the eyes of angels or omens of fate, but as suns, distant and real. And somehow that makes them no less divine. The age of reason has dawned, but the longing that created all those strange medieval rules, the need to believe that life has pattern and purpose, still burns, undiminished. And perhaps that is the greatest secret of all, that every time humanity kills fear, it resurrects wonder in its place. The journey ends where it began, on a quiet road beneath a sky that refuses to stay still. The land stretches out before you, stitched with rivers and fields, and the faint, distant shimmer of a city that could be any city in any century. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth. Somewhere, a church bell tolls, soft and slow. You realize you have been walking not just through time, but through the layers of the human soul. You began this path among the peasants and the plagues, among curfews and candles, in a world ruled by fear of the unknown. You've walked through guild halls, monasteries, courts, battlefields, and universities. You've met knights who killed for honor, monks who prayed for peace, healers who mixed herbs and hope, scholars who turned questions into light. And now, standing at the edge of all you've seen, you realize that every strange rule, every ritual, every superstition was an attempt at the same thing, to make chaos bearable. The Middle Ages are gone, but their shadow lingers in the quiet corners of our lives. We still build rules around our fears. We still light candles in the dark. We still believe, though we call our beliefs by different names now. Science, tradition, ethics, law, they are all descendants of the same impulse that once made peasants draw crosses above their doors, and monks measure their prayers by bells. You walk into a small modern village, its streets paved, its houses tidy. A woman waters her flowers, a child rides a bicycle. Everything looks different, yet something feels familiar.
You stop near a door painted red, and there, carved into the lintel, you notice a small mark. 2 letters intertwined, weathered almost to invisibility. You trace them with your finger. An old blessing mark. The wood may have been replaced 100 times since the Middle Ages, but someone, somewhere, kept carving that same protection, just in case. That's the secret, isn't it? The rules we think we've outgrown never truly die. They transform. The medieval man feared demons in the forest. We fear viruses, algorithms, loneliness. He wore charms of silver. We carry devices of glass. He obeyed curfews to guard against thieves. We lock our doors and check our cameras. Every age writes its own commandments on the same stone. You find yourself near a church, not ancient, but built in imitation of the old style. Its doors stand open, sunlight spilling across the pews. You step inside. A handful of people sit scattered in silence. The air smells of wax and thyme. A woman lights a candle and whispers something to herself. Not a prayer exactly, more a memory. You watch the flame tremble, and it feels like a continuation of all the fires you've seen. The hearths that once burned to purify the air, the torches that guarded the night, the lamps in the scriptorium that illuminated thought. The light has changed, but the gesture remains. You sit for a while, thinking about what has been lost and what has survived. The great cathedrals still stand, their stones weathered but defiant. The manuscripts copied by patient hands still whisper their wisdom in libraries. The music of the monks still echo in concert halls. And the questions that once haunted the medieval mind, who are we? Why do we suffer? What comes after death? Still haunt us, though we dress them in modern language. We are still pilgrims, still seekers of pattern and reason in a world that refuses to offer either easily. Outside, the sun begins to set. The sky burns orange and violet. You remember standing on another hill long ago, watching another sunset over a different Europe, a world of knights and serfs and saints. And though the world around you is cleaner, safer, brighter, you realize that the rhythm of human life has not changed. We still rise with hope, labor under uncertainty, and sleep with fear beside us. The difference is only in the names we give to those fears. You recall the monk's words, "Order is a form of hope," and suddenly you understand how deep that truth runs. The medieval rules, the fasting, the silence, the rituals of washing and prayer, were not cages, they were compasses.
They gave direction to lives lived in darkness. Without them, fear would have consumed everything. Perhaps we are not so different. We too build small rituals to make sense of the vast. We check the weather forecast before leaving the house, as if knowing the sky will keep it kind. We schedule our days by glowing screens instead of church bells. We whisper affirmations where monks once recited psalms. Our technology is our monastery, our faith in structure, our worship of control. And yet, like them, we are still fragile, still human. You continue walking, following a path that leads to a field on the edge of the village. The grass sways in the wind, and in the distance you see a single stone cross, half buried in the soil. Its edges are worn smooth, its carvings almost gone. You kneel beside it, brushing away the moss. There's no name, no date, just a faint Latin inscription, Memento Vivere, remember to live. You smile. It feels like a message across centuries. For all its rules and restrictions, the medieval world was not obsessed with death. It was obsessed with survival, with keeping life sacred in a time when it could vanish overnight. Every superstition, every ritual, every strange law was, in its own way, an act of defiance against despair. As the wind picks up, you close your eyes and listen. You can almost hear the echoes of the past, layered upon the present. the chant of monks beneath the hum of traffic, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer beneath the rhythm of machinery, the whispers of prayers woven through the static of the modern world. The Middle Ages never truly ended, they just moved inside us. You open your eyes and see a young couple walking hand in hand across the field.
They stop, lean close, and press their foreheads together. In another age, that might have been considered immodest. Now it is love unguarded. But love itself, its longing, its tenderness, its need for protection hasn't changed at all. The rules shift, the reasons remain. You begin to walk back toward the village as the first stars appear. Overhead, the sky looks vast and peaceful, but you know it's not empty. The medieval man saw angels there. You see galaxies. Both visions are right in their own way. Both are attempts to understand the same mystery. You pass a group of children chasing fireflies with laughter that fills the air like music. They carry lanterns shaped like tiny churches, glowing softly against the dark. Their parents call them in. It's late after all. You smile at the echo of the old rule. The curfew still lives, softened now by love instead of law. As you reach the edge of the village, you stop and look back one last time. The lights flicker in the windows, golden and warm. Somewhere a bell rings, perhaps a clock, perhaps a church. It doesn't matter. The sound carries the same heartbeat that once guided medieval nights. A reminder that even in darkness there is rhythm and therefore hope. You realize that the Middle Ages were not a time of ignorance, but of invention, the invention of meaning itself. Out of fear, they built order. Out of death, they built faith. Out of silence, they built music. And though their rules sometimes seem absurd to us, they were the scaffolding of a fragile humanity learning how to live with itself. You think of all you've seen, the bath laws and marriage codes, the quarantine and chivalry, the chants and charms, the torches and telescopes.
Each one, in its own way, a bridge between the unknown and the known. Together, they tell the oldest story in the world. The story of people trying not just to survive, but to make survival meaningful. The stars grow brighter as night deepens. You take a breath, and it feels like the first breath of the entire journey. The wind is cool, carrying whispers of every voice you've heard along the way. The laughter of children, the prayer of monks, the creak of oars on dark water, the sigh of parchment turning beneath a scribe's hand. You know now that no age is truly dark. Darkness, after all, is only the space where light has not yet been understood. You turn toward the horizon, where the faintest line of dawn begins to glow. The new world is waiting, the world of reason, science, cities, and freedom. But behind it, deep beneath its foundations, the Middle Ages still sleep like the roots of an old, unkillable tree. You whisper one last time, to no one in particular, and perhaps to everyone who ever lived by the rules of fear and faith alike. Thank you for keeping the light alive. And as the sun rises over the fields, its first rays touch the ancient cross, the village roofs, the wandering traveler, and the endless sky, reminding you that the story of humanity is not the story of progress alone, but of persistence. We have always been trying to understand the dark, and that, perhaps, is the only rule that ever truly mattered.